Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto was the living source of the Dino Gems, the Primal Dino Ranger, Naruto x Kira Ford x Cassidy Cornell, Power Rangers Dino Thunder. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Echo of Extinction. The line was invisible, yet as absolute as a cliff's edge. On one side, the familiar, sun-dappled reality of the Reefside National Forest, dusty trails. The scent of pine and dry earth, the distant drone of cicadas clinging to the afternoon heat. On the other, a silent, emerald twilight. Dr. Tommy, Oliver pushed a broad, unnaturally vibrant fern aside. The motion stirring a cloud of glowing spores that hung in the still air like a forgotten galaxy. He held a tricorder-like device in his other hand, its screen a frantic cascade of incomprehensible readings. The air here was thick, heavy with the smell of petrichor, ozone, and something else, something ancient and green, the scent of life so potent it was almost cloying. For 3 days, this 5-mile pocket of woods had been a geographical ghost. Satellite imagery showed a bizarre, hyper-saturated anomaly. Thermal scans displayed an energy signature that looked less like a patch of forest and more like a contained stellar nursery. The official story, disseminated by a flustered Parks Service, was a rare fungal bloom and a subsequent quarantine. Tommy knew better. He had felt the energy release from his home, a deep, resonant thrum that had rattled his bones and awakened instincts he had long since buried. It was a power signature unlike anything he had ever encountered. Not technological like the Machine Empire, not mystical like Divatox's magic. This was something else, something primordial. He paused, crouching low, his boots sinking slightly into the damp, black soil. The silence was the most unnerving part. There were no birds, no squirrels chittering in the canopy, no rustle of unseen things in the undergrowth. The teeming, noisy life of a California forest had been utterly, profoundly erased, replaced by a cathedral-like hush. The trees that grew here were familiar species, redwoods, oaks, pines, but they were grotesquely, beautifully wrong. Their bark was thicker, patterned like reptile scales. Their leaves were oversized, their canopies so dense they blotted out the sun, casting the forest floor in a perpetual, viridian gloom. Moss, thick as fleece, pulsed with a soft, internal bioluminescence. His device chirped weakly, the needle on its primary energy gauge quivering at the absolute maximum. Off the charts, Tommy murmured, his voice sounding loud and intrusive in the stillness. Whatever happened here, the energy is residual, saturated into the environment. He ran a hand over the stem of a colossal fern, its texture slick and leathery. The very biology of this place had been rewritten, supercharged by an unknown catalyst. It was evolution on fast forward, a terrifying, beautiful cancer of life. He pushed deeper, lowering the energy readings toward their undeniable epicenter. The terrain became stranger, the ground sloping downward into a shallow basin. The air grew cooler, carrying a static charge that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. And then he saw it. In the center of the basin, dominating the landscape, was a structure that defied all logic. It was a massive, jagged crystal, easily 40 feet tall, that jutted from the earth like a broken tooth. It wasn't clear or faceted like quartz, but was the color of ancient, hardened amber, its depths cloudy and opaque. Veins of gold light pulsed rhythmically within it, a slow, steady heartbeat that seemed to resonate with the very air he was breathing. The ground around its base was scorched black in a perfect circle, the only place in this hyper-fertile zone where nothing grew. It was a tomb and a throne, radiating an aura of immense, sleeping power. Tommy approached with the cautious reverence of an archaeologist unsealing a pharaoh's tomb. His scanner was useless now, screaming a continuous, high-pitched tone of complete overload. He shut it off, tucking it into his belt and relying on his senses. The air hummed, the ground vibrated. He reached out, his fingers hesitating just an inch from the crystal's warm, smooth surface. It felt alive. He circled the base, his eyes tracing the strange, organic curves of the amber formation. It wasn't a natural geological object. It looked grown, as if some titanic, wounded creature had bled this substance into the earth before falling into an eternal sleep. It was on the far side, shielded from his initial approach. That he saw the figure within. Suspended in the heart of the amber, perhaps 10 feet from the ground, was a man. Tommy's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a fossil, not a trick of the light. It was a human being, held in perfect stasis. He was young, early 20s at most, with a lean, wiry build that spoke of immense physical conditioning. His hair was a startling shock of sun-bright blonde, spiked and untamed. Faint, whisker-like marks, 3 on each cheek, gave his face a feral, almost feline quality. He was dressed in the tattered remains of what looked like some kind of combat uniform. Dark pants, shinobi-style sandals, and a torn black and orange jacket over a mesh shirt. A metal plate, engraved with a stylized leaf symbol, was tied to a shredded headband on his forehead. His eyes were closed, his expression serene, but the story of his body was one of violence. Old, silvery scars crisscrossed his arms, and a particularly nasty one puckered the skin over his heart. He was a warrior, entombed. "My God," Tommy whispered, the words swallowed by the oppressive silence. Who was he? How did he get here? Was he the cause of this phenomenon, or its first victim? As if in answer to his unspoken question, the golden light within the crystal flared. A low, harmonic chime echoed from the amber, and a spiderweb of cracks erupted across its surface from a single point over the man's chest. The rhythmic pulsing quickened, becoming frantic, erratic. The ground began to shake, not a gentle tremor, but a violent, rhythmic pounding, as if a colossal giant were striding toward them. Tommy stumbled back, his mind racing. An earthquake? No, this was different. This was localized. This was approaching. He looked from the cracking amber prison to the trembling forest, his every instinct screaming danger. He was a paleontologist. He was a veteran Power Ranger. And the sound that was now beginning to echo through the trees, a sound that bypassed the ears and vibrated deep within the sternum, was a sound he knew from the deepest, most primal corner of his soul. It was the roar of a king. The tyrant king. Inside the amber, the world was a thick, syrupy dream of fractured moments. Fire. The smell of burning earth and blood. The scream of a friend's name, swallowed by the roar of a tailed beast. The cold, sterile void between worlds. A woman with horns and pale, unforgiving eyes. The weight of 10,000 souls on his shoulders. A final, desperate surge of power. Not his own, but a maelstrom of red and black, of sun and shadow, a gamble to seal, to protect, to end it all. His name, a whisper on the wind. Naruto. Then, a new sensation. A vibration. A call from the outside world. A deep, resonant challenge that pierced the fog of his long slumber. It was a roar of power. Of dominance, of territory. It was a question. Who are you to sleep in my lands? His eyes snapped open. They were blue, a startling, impossible blue, the color of a glacial crevasse. They held no confusion, no grogginess of a long sleep. They held only the chilling, instantaneous clarity of a soldier waking on a battlefield. He was encased, trapped. He could feel the shell around him, hard and unyielding. He could feel the power thrumming outside. A threat. With a silent snarl, Naruto's body flexed. The energy that had replaced his chakra, the raw, untamed primordial force that now saturated his every cell, surged outward. It wasn't a technique. It was a simple, biological imperative. Break. The amber tomb exploded. Shards of glowing crystal, ranging in size from dust motes to daggers, burst outward in a wave of force. Tommy threw himself to the ground, shielding his head as the razor-sharp projectiles scythed through the air, embedding themselves in the oversized trees with solid, meaty thunks. The shockwave kicked up a storm of dirt and glowing moss, and the harmonic chime rose to a deafening shriek before shattering into silence. When the dust settled, Tommy pushed himself up, his ears ringing. The clearing was a wreck, the ground littered with sparkling amber fragments. The man from the crystal now stood in the center of the blackened circle where the tomb had been. He landed in a low crouch, one hand braced on the ground, his movements impossibly fluid. He rose slowly to his full height, his head on a swivel, his blue eyes taking in everything with a terrifying, predatory focus. He was breathing heavily, his body steaming in the cool air of the basin. Tommy got to his feet, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Easy. I'm not going to hurt you." The blond man's eyes snapped to him. They narrowed. He didn't seem to understand the words, but he understood the tone. He didn't relax, but his stance shifted from immediate combat to wary observation. A low, guttural string of syllables, sharp and foreign, came from his lips. It was a question, demanding and harsh. Japanese. I don't understand, Tommy said slowly, taking a cautious step forward. My name is Tommy Oliver. Can you understand me? Naruto's gaze was intense, analytical. He was taking in Tommy's strange clothes, his posture, the alien environment. His senses were screaming at him. The air tasted wrong. The smells were foreign. The very feel of the world's natural energy was a bizarre, unfamiliar song. This was not the elemental nations. This was not home. He opened his mouth to speak again. But the ground-shaking roar from before returned, 10 times louder, 10 times closer. It was a physical force, tearing through the trees and blasting them with a wave of sound. From the edge of the basin, the trees splintered and burst apart. A shape of impossible scale blotted out the gloomy light. It was a creature of metal and thunder, of ancient fury and futuristic design. Its body was a titan of crimson and silver steel, its head a symphony of jagged angles and predatory power, its jaw filled with chrome teeth the size of surfboards. Its optical sensors, glowing with a malevolent yellow light, scanned the clearing before locking, with unnerving precision, onto the small blonde man standing in the center. The Tyrannosaurus Dinosaur had answered the call of its creator. Tommy froze, a cold dread washing over him. Oh, no, he knew this Zord. It was his Zord, from a lifetime ago. But it wasn't supposed to be here. It wasn't supposed to be active. It was a machine, dormant for years. Yet, as he looked at it, he saw it wasn't moving like a machine. It was moving like an animal. Its massive head tilted, sniffing the air. Its metallic hide seemed to ripple over synthetic muscles. It took another step, the impact shaking the very bedrock, its immense shadow falling over the clearing. And its entire, undivided attention was on Naruto. The young man from the crystal didn't scream. He didn't run. He simply watched the metal behemoth approach, his body coiling like a spring, his expression hardening into a mask of grim determination. He had woken up in a strange world, encased in a rock, and was now being confronted by a monster made of metal and rage. To him, it was just another Tuesday. The T-Rex Zord let out another roar, a direct challenge this time. It wasn't a roar of mindless destruction. It was a challenge for dominance. It lowered its massive head, its glowing eyes boring into Naruto's. It recognized the energy radiating from him. The same primordial wellspring from which it had been born. It was an alpha recognizing another alpha in its territory. Naruto didn't back down. He met its gaze, and for the first time, Tommy saw something other than a lost soldier in the man's eyes. He saw a king. What are you doing? Get out of there, Tommy yelled, breaking from his shock and starting to run toward the confrontation. His shout was a mistake. It broke the tense standoff. The T-Rex, startled by the noise, jerked its head up and let out a frustrated snort of superheated air. Its massive tail, a 100-ton wrecking ball of steel, swept around, leveling a swath of the super-evolved forest. It wasn't aimed at Tommy, but the trajectory was clear. It was going to wipe out the entire basin in its agitation. Naruto moved. He didn't run. He vanished. One moment he was standing in the center of the clearing, the next he was a blur of orange and black, moving with a speed that defied physics. He flowed over the uneven ground, using the very air as a foothold. He wasn't just fast. He was unnaturally graceful, his body perfectly attuned to the path of least resistance. He appeared in front of Tommy, skidding to a halt just as the Zord's tail crashed through the space they had just occupied. The impact sent a shockwave of displaced air and debris blasting outward. Naruto stood his ground, a solid, unmovable rock in the face of a hurricane, shielding Tommy with his own body. He glanced back at Tommy, his blue eyes flashing with a silent, clear command, "Stay back." Then he turned to face the Zord. The dance began. The Tyrannosaurus was a creature of immense power, but it was also immense in size. Its movements were destructive but predictable. Naruto was its polar opposite, a being of pure, unadulterated speed and agility. He never stayed in one place for more than a heartbeat. When the Zord snapped its jaws, he was already running up its snout. When it tried to swat him with its powerful but small arms, he was sliding down its back. Using its own armor plates as a slide. He moved with a purpose that was terrifying to behold. He wasn't just dodging. He was analyzing, learning, testing. He leapt from a tree stump to the Zord's knee, his sandals gripping the metal surface. He ran up its leg, a fleeting human figure against a mountain of steel. The Zord roared in frustration, trying to shake him off, its movements becoming more frantic. From his vantage point, Tommy watched in stunned disbelief. The boy was fighting the T-Rex Zord. Unarmed, unarmored, and he wasn't losing. He wasn't winning, either. He couldn't possibly harm the Zord. But he was surviving. He was frustrating a being that could level a city block with a single step. He was using the environment with a masterful, instinctual brilliance that Tommy had only ever seen in the most seasoned martial arts grandmasters. He would kick off the Zord's side, using the momentum to propel himself to a high branch of a gargantuan redwood, forcing the Zord to turn, its feet sinking deep into the earth. Then, as it looked up, he would be gone, a flash of movement at its ankles. It was a battle of scale versus speed, of brute force versus tactical genius. Naruto leapt from the ground, twisting in midair to avoid a clumsy stomp that left a crater 20 feet across. He landed silently on the Zord's massive, swaying tail. He ran its length, his steps sure and certain. The Zord felt him, twisting its body to try and dislodge him. Naruto simply adjusted his balance, leaning into the turn like a surfer on a wave. He reached the base of its spine, leapt high, and landed on the back of its neck, right behind its colossal head. The Zord went still. Its frustrated roars ceased. It stood, frozen, the only sound the low hum of its internal pow. Source and the drip of condensation from its metal hide. Naruto stood on its neck, his tattered jacket flapping in a breeze that didn't exist. He wasn't trying to break its neck or find a weak spot. He just stood there, his feet planted firmly. He placed a hand flat on the cold metal. He closed his eyes. He wasn't channeling his energy as an attack. He was communicating. He let the raw, primordial force within him flow out. Not in a violent burst, but in a steady, controlled wave. It was a statement, a broadcast of his very soul into the ancient consciousness of the machine beast. The energy signature was the same as the Zord's, but infinitely older, deeper, and more complex. It said, "I am here. I am that which you are. I am not your enemy. Cease." Tommy could feel the change in the air. The oppressive, aggressive energy emanating from the T-Rex softened, replaced by something that felt like confusion. Then, acceptance. The Zord shuddered once, a deep, full-body tremor. It slowly, carefully, lowered its head until its snout was resting on the basin floor, a gesture of submission. Of respect. Naruto opened his eyes. He gave the Zord's neck a final, gentle pat, and then leapt off, landing softly on the ground before it. The Tyrannosaurus watched him for a long moment, its glowing yellow eyes seeming to hold a newfound intelligence. It let out one final, low rumble, not a roar, but a deep, resonant chuff of acknowledgement. Then, with a surprising grace for its size, it turned. It walked back toward the edge of the basin, the forest parting before it, and then it simply sank. The earth opened up, swallowing the metal giant without a trace, leaving behind only the silence and its colossal footprints. The clearing was still. The immediate threat was gone. The adrenaline had fueled Naruto's impossible movements finally faded, and the true cost of his awakening and the subsequent confrontation hit him like a physical blow. The energy he had expended, the raw life force he had used to communicate with the Zord, had drained him to his very core. A wave of exhaustion, profound and absolute, washed over him. His legs buckled. He fell to one knee, then collapsed forward onto the scorched earth. Unconscious before he hit the ground, Tommy rushed to his side, his heart pounding in his chest. He knelt, checking the young man's pulse. It was steady, but faint. His breathing was shallow. He had pushed himself far beyond any normal human limit. As Tommy looked at the unconscious warrior, a strange light began to coalesce in the air just above him. It was the residual energy from the confrontation. The ambient power Naruto had used to pacify the Zord. It swirled like smoke, motes of gold, silver, and raw light dancing in the gloom. The air filled with the sound of faint, crystalline chimes. The light began to separate into 3 distinct, swirling vortexes. The first vortex burned with an intense, fiery light, like the heart of a volcano. It condensed, cooled, and solidified, forming a perfect, teardrop-shaped crystal of the deepest, most vibrant red. The second vortex was a cool, tranquil blue, the color of the deep ocean. It spun and folded in on itself, creating a smooth, oval gem that seemed to drink the light around it. The third was a brilliant, electric yellow, crackling with untamed energy. It sharpened into a sharp, triangular crystal that pulsed with a fierce, wild light. The 3 gems hovered in the air for a moment, humming with a power that Tommy could feel in his teeth. Then, their light faded to a soft, internal glow, and they fell, landing gently in the soft black soil beside Naruto's still form. Tommy reached out with a trembling hand and picked them up. The red gem was warm, thrumming with strength and courage. The blue was cool and smooth, radiating a sense of calm and intellect. The yellow was alive with a buzzing energy, a feeling of wild freedom. Dino gems. They hadn't been found. They hadn't been discovered. They had been born. Tommy Oliver looked from the impossible gems in his hand to the unconscious, scar-covered young man who had just commanded the loyalty of a dinosaur and had created these artifacts from thin air. The questions from before returned, now amplified 1,000-fold, joined by a dawning, terrifying, and exhilarating realization. This wasn't just a lost soldier. This wasn't just a mysterious anomaly. This was something new, something that would change everything. He cradled the gems protectively, his mind already racing, calculating, planning. The first step was to get this man somewhere safe. The second, to figure out what he had just unleashed upon the world. He looked down at the whisker-marked face, peaceful in its exhaustion, and asked the silence of the primordial forest, "What in the world are you?" Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Anomaly in Homeroom 2B. Weeks had passed since the day the forest had screamed and a king of steel had bowed. Weeks that had, for Naruto Uzumaki, been a disorienting, high-speed education in a world that operated on rules he was only just beginning to decipher. The language had been the first and easiest barrier. His shinobi-honed mind, trained to learn, memorize, and adapt with lethal speed, absorbed English like a sponge. Within days he could understand, within a week he could respond, and by the 3rd week, he spoke with a fluency that was jarringly at odds with his continued, profound silence. He learned that cars were not demonic metal carriages, that television was not a genjutsu box, and that the strange, charismatic man named Tommy Oliver was, for reasons Naruto couldn't fathom, utterly determined to help him. His new life was a structured, minimalist existence within the walls of Dr. Oliver's spacious, museum-like home. He would wake before the sun, his internal clock still set to a lifetime of shinobi readiness. He would meditate on the back deck overlooking the Pacific Ocean, trying to feel for the world's natural energy. Only to be met with that same unfamiliar, chaotic song. It was not the calm, ordered chakra of his homeland, it was wilder, deeper, thrumming with a raw, untamed power that resonated with the new energy singing in his own blood. He was a tuning fork, and this entire planet was a symphony playing a key he had never heard before. Tommy, for his part, treated Naruto like the ultimate scientific puzzle mixed with the responsibilities of a reluctant guardian. The initial medical scans had been a nightmare of impossible data. Naruto's cellular regeneration was off the charts, healing a deep cut in minutes. His metabolism burned calories at a rate that should have required him to eat constantly, yet he seemed to draw sustenance from the air itself. The energy his body produced was not bioelectric, it was something else. Something Tommy's most advanced equipment could only register as a blinding white noise labeled error in classified primordial. He was, in every measurable sense, a biological impossibility. And so, Tommy had made a calculated, and perhaps reckless, decision. To understand the anomaly, he had to observe it in a controlled social ecosystem. To help the man, he had to expose him to the world he was now a part of. He had forged the necessary documents, pulled a few strings, and enrolled his quiet, super-powered houseguest in the one place where social dynamics see old be observed in their most raw and unforgiving state, Reefside Union High School. Connor's perspective. Connor McKnight moved through the crowded hallway of Reefside High like a shark through water. It was his ocean, and he was its apex predator. People parted before him, a mix of admiration, envy, and ingrained social habit. He was the star of the soccer team, the king of a very small, very loud kingdom. And his confidence was a tangible aura that radiated from his perfectly coiffed hair to the tips of his expensive sneakers. He was leaning against a locker, laughing with his teammates about their upcoming game against Capital City, when he saw him. The new kid, the one Drive, the weirdly cool but definitely weird science teacher, had brought in. Naruto Uzumaki, a name that sounded like a sneeze. He'd been here 2 weeks, and in that time, had become a walking, breathing social black hole. He didn't affiliate with any group. He didn't try to talk to anyone. He just existed. He was walking down the opposite side of the hall, his bag slung over one shoulder. He wasn't particularly tall, but he was built solid, and he moved with a liquid grace that was just off. People in the crowded hall jostled and bumped into each other, a chaotic stream of teenage energy. But the new kid flowed through it all without touching anyone, his body making unconscious adjustments. He wasn't avoiding contact. It was more like the crowd was unconsciously parting for him, just like they did for Connor, but for a completely different reason. It wasn't deference. It was like they didn't even see him until he was already past. "Dude, there's that weirdo again," one of his teammates, Derek, muttered. "Gives me the creeps. He just stares." Connor watched him. Naruto's gaze wasn't vacant, it was active. His head wasn't moving, but his eyes were constantly scanning, taking in the exits, the faces in the crowd, the angles of the lockers. It wasn't the look of a lost new kid, as the look of a soldier surveying a potentially hostile environment. That was what unnerved Connor. The kid projected a stillness, a centeredness that Connor, for all his bluster and popularity, knew he didn't possess. It felt like a challenge. An unspoken, unintentional one. Connor's entire social standing was built on being the center of attention. This guy was a void, and it drew the eye in a way that felt like a threat to his reign. "He's probably just some loser from Japan," Connor said, his voice a little too loud. "Probably doesn't even speak English." As if on cue, Naruto's head turned, his impossibly blue eyes locking directly onto Connor's from 50 feet away. There was no malice in the look, no anger. Just a flash of pure, unnerving acknowledgement. It felt like being X-rayed. Connor's laughter died in his throat. The new kid held his gaze for a beat longer, then turned and continued down the hall, disappearing into the river of students. Connor felt a prickle of something he wasn't used to. It wasn't fear. It was insignificance. And he hated it. Ethan's perspective. The system had a bug. A ghost in the machine. Ethan James leaned back in his chair in the computer lab, tapping a pen against his chin as he stared through the large interior window into the hallway. He categorized the world in data, in patterns, in systems. Reefside High was a complex but predictable operating system. There were the jock executables like Connor, running their popularity.x program on a continuous loop. There were the fashionista subroutines, the drama club scripts, the academic demons. And then there was Naruto Uzumaki. He was an uncompiled line of code from an unknown source. Ethan had first noticed him on day one. During the morning rush, the hallways operated on a basic fluid dynamics model. Naruto broke the model. He moved with impossible efficiency, his path through the chaos always the mathematically perfect line of least resistance. It was like watching a character with a perfect pathing algorithm navigate a field of NPCs. His social data was even stranger. He registered a 0 on all measurable metrics. He didn't initiate conversations. He didn't respond to social cues unless directly addressed. He ate lunch alone, not with the sad, hunched posture of an outcast, but with the focused, economical movements of someone for whom eating was a task, not a social event. His grades, Ethan had managed to glimpse on a teacher's tablet, were a bizarre mix. In subjects like math and science, he was average, clearly struggling with the new concepts. In history, he was failing spectacularly, as if he had no context for world events. But in physical education, he was a god. Ethan had watched him during their gymnastics rotation. The coach had asked them to do a simple forward roll on a mat. Naruto had watched the demonstration with an intense, analytical look, then performed a flawless, silent aerial flip that ended in a perfect three-point landing, making absolutely no sound. He hadn't been showing off. It was clear from his confused expression when the coach and the rest of the class stared, slack-jawed, that he had simply done what he thought was asked of him. Perhaps misjudging the required level of skill. He had an input-output disconnect. He operated on a different set of physical and social physics. A living cheat code, Ethan murmured, turning back to his screen. He was currently trying to write a simple program to predict student traffic flow in the main atrium. Every time he ran the simulation, it worked perfectly, until he tried to add a variable for Uzumaki. The moment he did, the entire system crashed. You couldn't predict the unpredictable. He was a random number generator in a world of algebra. And for a systems analyst like Ethan, it was the most fascinating problem he had ever encountered. Cassidy's perspective. Angle down. Devin, I want the shot to be from a low angle. It makes the subject look more imposing, more mysterious. Cassidy Cornell adjusted the lapel on her blazer, her eyes narrowed in professional concentration. Behind her, her long-suffering cameraman, Devin, sighed and dutifully knelt, NTING the large school news camera up at their target. Cass, he's just sitting on a bench, Devin grumbled. He's not a subject. He's a new kid eating a sandwich. Can't we do a story on the new cheerleading uniforms? The cheerleading uniforms are a puff piece, Devin. This, Cassidy said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, is a story. Look at him. Her target was Naruto Uzumaki. He was sitting on a bench in the school's main quad, methodically eating an apple. But it was how he did it. He didn't slouch. His back was ramrod straight. His eyes, even while staring at nothing, seemed to miss nothing. He was surrounded by the noise and chaos of a high school lunch break, shouting, laughter, music from a dozen different phones, but he sat in a pocket of profound silence, utterly unaffected. He was an island of calm in a sea of hormonal static. Cassidy knew a story when she saw one. And this kid screamed front-page special report. There were whispers, rumors, that he'd gotten in to a fight with the football team's linebacker and hadn't even flinched. That he could speak 5 languages. That he was secretly the son of a Yakuza boss in hiding. It was all nonsense, but it pointed to a central truth. He was interesting. All right, we're rolling. I'm going in, she announced, striding forward with the manufactured confidence of a seasoned reporter. She thrust the school news microphone toward him like a weapon. Naruto Uzumaki, Cassidy Cornell, Reefside High News. Our viewers are dying to know. What's your story? What brings a mysterious transfer student like yourself to our humble town? Are you hiding a dark past? A secret mission? Naruto finished chewing his bite of apple. He swallowed. His gaze lifted from the middle distance and settled on her. Cassidy was used to people being flustered, annoyed, or flattered by her ambushes. She was not used to this. His blue eyes were completely placid, revealing nothing. They simply looked at her, and in their depths, she felt a sudden, bizarre sense of being incredibly young and foolish. No mission, he said. His voice was a low baritone, his English precise, with an odd, unplaceable accent. Cassidy blinked, recovering. Right, of course not. But the mystery, you have to admit, you cultivate an air of it. The silence, the intensity. Is it a deliberate choice? A persona? I am quiet, he stated, as if it were the most obvious fact in the world. Like saying the sky was blue. There was no inflection, no sarcasm. It was a simple data point. And are you enjoying Reefside? The school, the people, she pressed, trying a different angle. He looked around the quad, his gaze sweeping over the various cliques and laughing groups. Then he looked back at her. It is loud. Cassidy felt a genuine laugh bubble up, but she suppressed it. This was gold. The deadpan delivery was perfect. Loud. I'll quote you on that. One last question. What do you see in your future? What are the big plans for Naruto Uzumaki? He was silent for a long moment. He looked down at the half-eaten apple in his hands, his expression unreadable. For the first time, Cassidy saw a flicker of something behind the calm facade, a deep, ancient weariness that had no place on the face of a high school student. To find a quiet place, he said, his voice barely a whisper. He then stood up, dropped the apple core neatly into a nearby trash can, and walked away, leaving Cassidy Cornell standing with her microphone, feeling like she had just interviewed a mountain. "Did you get that?" she breathed to Devon. "Yeah," Devon said, lowering the camera. "I got it. I still have no idea who he is, but, wow. That was weirdly intense." Cassidy watched him go, a slow smile spreading across her face. This was better than she thought. This wasn't just a story. It was an enigma, and she was going to be the one to solve it. Kira's perspective. Haley's cyberspace was Kira Ford's sanctuary. The scent of old coffee grounds, ozone from the computers, and the dusty smell of the small, neglected stage was more comforting to her than any perfume. It was here she could shed the sarcastic, tough girl armor she wore in the hallways of Reefside High-End. Just be herself. A girl with a guitar and a song. She was on stage now, not performing, just practicing. Her fingers danced over the fretboard, a new, melancholic melody taking shape under her touch. She'd first seen him here. 3 days ago. The new kid, Naruto. He had walked in, ordered a bottle of water from Haley, and taken the corner booth, the one no one ever sat in because the lighting was bad and it was too far from the computer terminals. And he had just sat there, for 2 hours, nursing the single bottle of water. He wasn't on a phone, wasn't reading, wasn't doing anything. He was just watching, listening. He'd been back every day since. He never bothered anyone. He never spoke. He would just sit in his corner booth, a silent, solitary fixture. It should have been creepy, but it wasn't. Kira, a professional observer of the human condition, a prerequisite for any good songwriter, noticed that his gaze wasn't predatory or judgmental. It was attentive. When she played, he would close his eyes, his posture relaxing almost imperceptibly, as if the music was a balm. Today, she finished her new song, the final chord hanging in the mostly empty cafe. She opened her eyes and looked toward the corner booth. He was there, as always. But this time, his eyes were open, and he was looking directly at her. He gave a single, slow nod. It wasn't applause. It was something more. It was acknowledgement, respect. Something compelled her to act. Slinging her guitar onto her back, she hopped off the stage and walked over to his booth, sliding into the seat opposite him. He didn't seem surprised, just watched her with those calm, blue eyes. "You come here a lot," she said, her usual sarcastic edge softened by genuine curiosity. "You must really like bad coffee and outdated computer equipment." A small, almost invisible smile touched the corner of his lips. "The music is good." His voice surprised her. It was deeper than she expected. "Oh, well, thanks. I'm Kira, by the way." "Naruto." "I know," she said. "You're kind of the ghost of Reefside High. The mystery man." He tilted his head, a gesture of genuine confusion. "I do not understand." "It means nobody knows anything about you," she clarified. "And it makes them nervous. People like things they can label. Jock, geek, musician." She gestured to herself with a wry smile. They can't label." "I am a student," he said simply. "Yeah, but you're not. Are you?" The words were out before she could stop them. It was a hunch, a gut feeling that came from the way he held himself, the look in his eyes. This was no student. This was a man pretending to be a boy, and not doing a very good job of it. His placid expression tightened, just for a second. The mask slipped, and she saw a flash of that same weariness she'd seen during Cassidy's interview. "I am learning," he said, his voice quiet. Kira decided to back off. She'd clearly hit a nerve. "Well, for what it's worth," she said, standing up. "I think, unlabeled, is a good look. Keep him guessing." She turned to walk away, but his voice stopped her. "The song you played," he said. "It was sad, but it was hopeful." Kira paused, looking back at him. No one had ever described her music that way. They said it was angry, or loud, or cool. But he'd heard the things she was trying to say without words. He'd actually listened. "Yeah," she said, a real, unguarded smile gracing her lips. "Yeah, I guess it is." As she walked back to the stage, she felt like she had just made contact with a different species. And for the first time, she felt that the mystery of Naruto Uzumaki wasn't something to be solved, but maybe, just maybe, something to be understood. The gymnasium. The shrill whistle of the gym coach echoed off the polished wooden floor. "All right, people, listen up. Today, We play the game of kings. The great equalizer. Today, we play dodgeball. A collective groan went through half the class, while a predatory cheer went up from Connor McKnight and his cronies. It was a day of sanctioned violence, and they were ready. The teams were divided. By some twist of fate, Connor, Ethan, Kira, and Naruto were all on the same team. Naruto looked at the red rubber ball placed in his hand with a look of utter bafflement. The coach's explanation of the rules seemed to only deepen his confusion. The whistle blew. Chaos erupted. Connor was a machine, snatching up balls and firing them with pinpoint, painful accuracy. Ethan, using a surprisingly complex understanding of geometry and ricochet angles, managed to avoid getting hit while taking out opponents by banking shots off the walls. Kira, surprisingly agile, was one of the last on her feet. Naruto, however, was a phantom. He didn't throw any balls. He didn't even seem to be trying to dodge. He simply wasn't where the balls were going to be. He would take a half step to his left, and a ball would whistle past his right ear. He would lean back slightly, and a ball would skim the front of his shirt. He was moving with the least possible amount of effort to achieve a perfect result. Connor saw this, and a primal, competitive rage filled him. The weirdo was making a mockery of the game. He saw an opening, snatched a ball, and pivoted, putting his entire soccer-trained body into the throw. The ball became a red blur, aimed directly at Naruto's face from 10 feet away. It was an impossible shot to dodge. Naruto didn't dodge. His head didn't even move. His right hand came up in a blur of motion, palm open. The ball, traveling at what must have been 60 miles an hour, slapped into his palm. There was a loud thwack. But Naruto didn't recoil. He didn't stumble. His hand hadn't even been pushed back. He had simply caught it. He looked down at the ball in his hand, then back up at the stunned silence of the gymnasium. A look of mild curiosity on his face. From the sidelines, Ethan's jaw was on the floor. The amount of kinetic energy, the tensile strength of his wrist and forearm, that's impossible. That's physically impossible. Kira just stared, a slow smile spreading across her face. Okay, she thought. That's new. The game ended a few minutes later. Their team won. Naruto hadn't thrown a single ball. Tommy's lab. Detention. I don't have detention, Connor protested, throwing his gym bag into the back of Dr. Oliver's Jeep. You kicked a soccer ball through the window of the principal's office, Connor. That's not just detention. That's practically a felony, Tommy said from the driver's seat, a hint of amusement in his voice. I was practicing my new song in the band room. How was I supposed to know the amp went up to 12? Kira said, slouching in the passenger seat. And my algorithm to optimize the school bell schedule was theoretically sound, Ethan added from the back. It just needed a few more beta tests before deployment. Tommy just shook his head, pulling away from the school. Whatever the reasons, you're all stuck with me for the afternoon. There's a project I need your help with. The drive to his house was filled with the grumbling of the three teenagers. They arrived at the large, modern house with its iconic T-Rex skeleton in the foyer. Naruto was already there, sitting at the kitchen table, reading a high school physics textbook with an expression of intense concentration. He looked up as they entered, gave a small nod, and went back to his reading. All right, follow me, Tommy said, his tone shifting from cool teacher to something more serious. He led them through the living room, past the towering fossil, and to a blank wall at the back. He pressed a hidden panel, and with a hiss of hydraulics, the wall slid away, revealing a stone staircase leading down into darkness. Whoa, Ethan breathed. Connor and Kira were speechless. Tommy flicked a switch, and lights flickered on, illuminating a massive, high-tech subterranean command center. Consoles bristled with monitors, strange devices hummed with power, and in the center of the room, on a raised platform, were 3 empty containment units colored red, blue, and yellow. Doctor. Oh, what is this place? Kira asked, her voice a whisper of awe. This, Tommy said, walking toward the main console, is my life's work. It's a bit of a long story. He reached behind the console and brought out a black, velvet-lined case. He placed it on the table and opened it. Inside, resting on the velvet, were 3 gems. One was a fiery, volcanic red. One was a deep, oceanic blue. And one was a brilliant, crackling yellow. They pulsed with a soft, internal light, a living energy that seemed to call out to the three teenagers. Connor found himself staring at the red gem, feeling a strange surge of strength and power. Ethan was captivated by the blue, his mind feeling sharper, clearer than ever before. Kira couldn't look away from the yellow, hearing a faint, high-pitched scream in her mind that sounded like freedom. They looked up at their science teacher, their expressions a mixture of confusion, fear, and wonder. Tommy Oliver looked at the three of them, his face grim, the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Your lives," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast, secret lab, "are about to change forever." Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Cacophony of Power. The weight of the three gems on the velvet-lined case was nothing compared to the oppressive weight of the silence they commanded. Connor, Ethan, and Kira stared, their teenage worlds of soccer practice, computer code, and guitar riffs violently colliding with the reality of ancient power and secret labs. It was the kind of revelation that should have been thrilling, the stuff of comic books and video games. But standing in the cold, humming air of the subterranean lair, the feeling was not excitement. It was a deep, stomach-churning dread. "You're kidding, right?" Connor was the first to break the silence, a nervous laugh failing to mask his disbelief. "This is some kind of elaborate prank. A social experiment for your science class. Funny, drive. Oh, you got us. Does this look like a prank, Mr. McKnight?" Tommy's voice was devoid of its usual easygoing warmth. It was the voice of a man who had seen too much. A general briefing his soldiers before a war they didn't know had already begun. He gestured to the sprawling command center, the monitors displaying atmospheric energy readings. The gleaming metal of the empty Zord bays. "I wish it were." Ethan stepped forward, his eyes wide with a manic, intellectual gleam. He adjusted his glasses, peering at the gems as if they were lines of impossible, beautiful code. "The energy output is phenomenal. Stable, yet radiating on a frequency I've never seen. It's not nuclear, not electromagnetic, it's biological. No, pre-biological, primordial. How did you stabilize them?" "I didn't," Tommy said, his gaze flicking toward the staircase, a silent acknowledgement of the quiet young man sitting in the kitchen above them. "They were created." That statement hung in the air, too strange to even begin dissecting. Kira, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, her voice tight. "Created by what? And what do you expect us to do with them? They're just rocks, drive." Oliver. Pretty, glowing rocks. Yet even as she said it, she could feel the yellow gem calling to her, a high-frequency hum that vibrated in her teeth, a silent scream of power that matched the feedback of her guitar amp. Tommy picked up three strange, wrist-mounted devices from the console. They were black and silver, designed with a fierce, reptilian aesthetic. "These are your Dino morphers. They are prototypes, designed to interface with the gems and tap into the universal biofield, the morphing grid. They will allow you to channel the gems' power, to protect yourselves." "To fight." "Fight what?" Connor demanded, crossing his arms. "A bunch of fossils. What's going to attack Reefside? A grumpy triceratops?" "Something is coming," Tommy said, his expression hardening. The energy release that created these gems was the equivalent of a cosmic flare. It put this planet on a map that you do not want to be on. There are forces out there, beings who would see our world twisted and broken. Remade in their own image. I've fought them before. I had hoped I would never have to again. He handed a morpher to each of them. Connor took the red one reluctantly. Ethan accepted the blue with a trembling, fascinated hand. Kira stared at the yellow one in her palm, its weight feeling like an anchor. "You don't have to do this," Tommy said, his voice softening for the first time. "I can't force you, but I chose you for a reason. Connor, you have a warrior's spirit, a fierce drive. Ethan, your mind is your greatest weapon, you see the patterns everyone else misses. And Kira, you have a strength and a voice that can shatter walls. The gems, they chose you, too." The implication was terrifying. That these stones had a will. That they had found something within them that resonated with their ancient power. They stood in silence for another minute, the hum of the lab filling the void. Finally, Kira closed her hand around the morpher. "What if we say no? Then I'll find someone else," Tommy said simply, though the look in his eyes said he knew he couldn't. But pray they say yes before it's too late. For now, go. Live your lives. But keep these with you, always. You'll know when you need them. The Reefside Annual Music Festival was a controlled explosion of teenage life. The air in the city's Central Park was thick with the smells of grilled hot dogs, cheap perfume, and sun-baked grass. 3 different stages blasted a cacophony of competing genres across the lawn, where a sea of high school and college students milled about, their faces lit by heat glow of their phones and the bright California sun. Backstage at the indie rock tent, Kira Ford was trying desperately to tune her black Fender Stratocaster, but the notes sounded wrong, dissonant. Her mind wasn't on the music. In her pocket, the yellow Dino gem was a constant, warm presence, a secret weight against her thigh. Dr. Oliver's words echoed in her head, a persistent, unnerving feedback loop. Forces that would see our world twisted and broken. It sounded like the plot of one of Ethan's terrible B-movies. But the feeling she'd gotten in that lab, the sheer, palpable reality of the power humming from the gem, had been undeniable. "You good, Ford?" asked Mark, her band's drummer, snapping his sticks together. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just pre-show jitters," she lied, forcing a smile. "Let's just get out there and melt some faces, okay?" She stepped onto the stage, the heat of the stage lights hitting her, the roar of the small but enthusiastic crowd a familiar comfort. She glanced out over the sea of faces. Connor and Ethan were near the front, dragged here under duress, looking profoundly out of place. Cassidy Cornell and her human camera stand, Devin, were off to the side, clearly covering the event for the school's TV station. And then she saw him. Way in the back, leaning against a massive oak tree, was Naruto. He was almost perfectly camouflaged in the shifting shadows, his stillness a stark contrast to the kinetic energy of the crowd around him. He wasn't watching the stage like a fan, he was watching it like a guard on a wall. His gaze swept the area, noting the flow of the crowd, the placement of the security guards, the structural integrity of the stage rigging. He was observing, analyzing, his calm presence in the middle of all this noise both unsettling and, for a reason Kira couldn't explain, profoundly reassuring. Their eyes met for a fleeting second across the distance. He gave another one of those single, slow nods. "I see you." Kira took a deep breath, turned to her microphone, and let the music take over. The first power chord of her opening song ripped through the air, and for a glorious few minutes, the world of secret BS and glowing gems dissolved into the pure, honest scream of amplified rebellion. Deep in a hidden, undersea fortress of twisted metal and bubbling chemicals, Mesogog sat upon his throne. The Chame R was a monstrous hybrid of a laboratory and a primeval swamp, the air thick with the stench of ozone and amniotic fluid. On a massive viewscreen composed of shimmering energy, an image of the Reefside Music Festival played. So much useless, chattering biomass, the creature rasped, his voice a dry, sibilant hiss that seemed to come from a throat full of sand and gravel. This world is a festering wound, a failed experiment. They wallow in their mediocrity, deaf to the glorious, predatory symphony of their own past. A slender figure in a severe black uniform stepped out of the shadows. "My Lord Mesogog," Elsa said, her voice a model of cold efficiency. "The energy signature you detected has stabilized. It remains concentrated in that area." "A beacon," Mesogog hissed, leaning forward, his reptilian head tilting. "A font of the pure, creative violence that spawned the dinosaurs. It sleeps, but it calls for a worthy vessel. We must agitate it. We must force it to reveal its nature." He gestured a clawed hand toward a massive incubation tank where a grotesque shape writhed in green fluid. "Elsa, deploy the bio-troll. Its purpose is not victory. Its purpose is to sing a song of destruction so loud that the source of that power cannot help but answer." "At once, my lord," Elsa said, bowing. With a press of a button, a transporter beam hummed to life. The tank drained, and the creature within, a horrifying amalgam of a Gila monster, a praying mantis, and salvaged cybernetics, let out a chittering screech as it dissolved into a beam of emerald light aimed squarely at the heart of Reefside. The first sign that something was wrong was a flicker in the stage lights. The second was the high-pitched whine that cut through Kira's guitar solo, a sound like 1,000 cicadas screaming at once. The air in the middle of the crowd began to shimmer, distorting like a heat haze. A wave of ozone washed over the park, and then, with a deafening crack of displaced air, the bio-troll materialized. It was 10 feet tall. Its scaly hide a mottled patchwork of black and yellow. Its head swiveled on a thin neck, multifaceted insectoid eyes glowing with a sickly green light. One arm ended in a vicious, serrated mantis-like claw, the other in a cybernetic cannon that hummed with stored energy. It let out a clicking, alien shriek that cut through the music and sent a wave of primal terror through the crowd. For a moment, there was a collective, frozen silence. Then, the screaming began. Panic was a tidal wave. The crowd broke, stampeding in every direction, a chaotic flood of terrified humanity. Hot dog carts were overturned, fences were trampled, and the cheerful festival atmosphere curdled into sheer terror. From his vantage point by the tree, Naruto had seen the shimmer seconds before the creature appeared. His body had gone from relaxed observation to high alert in a nanosecond. While the crowd was still processing the shock, he was already moving. But he wasn't running toward the monster. He was running perpendicular to the stampede, his movements a blur. He grabbed a small child who had fallen, lifting her into the arms of her hysterical mother. He pointed with a sharp, commanding finger. "That way, go." His voice cut through the noise, a blade of pure authority. He didn't stay to be thanked. He was already moving again, effortlessly navigating the panicked mob. His sole focus on minimizing the chaos and getting the civilians clear. Cassidy Cornell reacted with the instinct of a true journalist. While Devon was fumbling with his camera, trying to run, she grabbed his arm with an iron grip. "No, you film this. Devon, this is it. This is the story. Are you seeing this?" The bio-troll took a step, its heavy feet crushing a picnic blanket. It raised its an arm and fired a blast of green energy that vaporized a hot dog stand in a shower of sparks and greasy smoke. On the stage, Kira's bandmates had already fled. She stood frozen, guitar still clutched in her hand, watching the nightmare unfold. In the chaos, she saw Connor and Ethan, trying to push their way through the crowd, their faces pale with shock. Their eyes met hers, and a silent, terrified understanding passed between them. "This is it. This is what he warned us about." The bio-troll's multifaceted eyes swiveled and locked onto the stage, onto her. It let out another shriek and began to stomp forward, its mantis claw raised to strike. That was the final push. Fear gave way to a surge of adrenaline. Kira dropped her guitar, her hand diving into her pocket and closing around the dinomorpher. Across the field, Connor and Ethan did the same. They brought the devices to their wrists, the metal clicking into place. "Dino Thunder, power up." The three of them shouted the words in unison. A desperate prayer against the encroaching monster. The transformation was nothing like they could have imagined. It was not a clean, sparkling sequence. It was agony. A bolt of raw, untamed energy surged from the gems. A billion years of prehistoric fury flooding their nervous systems. Kira screamed as she felt her bones creak, her muscles burn as if being torn apart and rewoven. Golden light exploded from her, forming a skin-tight undersuit, followed by the searing heat of armor plating materializing over her limbs and torso. A helmet shaped like a pterodactyl's head slammed down over her face. Her vision dissolving into a sea of yellow static before resolving into a heads-up display she didn't understand. Connor roared as red energy consumed him, the power of the Tyrannosaurus a physical, crushing weight. Ethan yelled as blue light encased him, his mind reeling from a flood of tactical data and geological information from the Triceratops. When it was over, they stood there. 3 armored figures in the center of the ruined park. The red, blue, and yellow Dino Thunder Power Rangers. But they were not heroes. They were 3 terrified kids in super-powered suits they had no idea how to control. "Whoa, this is intense," Ethan's voice crackled over their internal communicators. He tried to take a step and promptly tripped over his own feet, landing in a heap of blue armor. Connor felt a surge of unfamiliar strength. He balled his fists. "Intense. This is awesome. Let's get him." He charged forward with a battle cry, only to find his new speed was far greater than he anticipated. He overshot his target by 20 feet, stumbling to a halt. The bio-troll watched their clumsy display with a chittering sound that might have been laughter. It swung its massive claw at Kira. She shrieked, jumping back, her own movements awkward and jerky. She summoned her Terra grips, the twin daggers appearing in her hands, but they felt heavy and alien. The first battle of the Dino Thunder Rangers was a complete and utter disaster. They were powerful, but they had no skill. They swung wildly, their attacks uncoordinated. The Bio Troll, a being born for battle, swatted them around like unruly children. It blasted Connor with its cannon, sending him flying into the wreckage of the stage. It parried Ethan's clumsy staff attack and kicked him into a fountain. It backhanded Kira, sending her skidding across the grass. Lying on the ground, her helmet ringing from the impact, Kira saw the monster raise its mantis claw for a final, killing blow. They were going to die. On their first day, in these ridiculous costumes. Suddenly, a black and orange blur shot past her. Naruto, having cleared the last of the civilians from the immediate area, had seen enough. The Rangers were going to be killed. He moved with a speed that made the super-powered Connor look like he was standing still. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't need one. He slid under the Bio Troll's descending claw, his hand snatching a length of thick electrical cable that had been torn from the stage lights. In one fluid motion, he leapt onto the creature's back, wrapping the cable around its thick neck and pulling tight. The monster shrieked, clawing at its back, but Naruto was a phantom, his smaller size and superior agility making him impossible to hit. He used the cable to wrench the creature's head to the side, causing its next energy blast to go wide, obliterating the oak tree he had been leaning against moments before. What the hell? Connor groaned, pushing himself up. The three Rangers watched, stunned, as the unmorphed, unarmored kid from their science class engaged the monster with a terrifying efficiency that bordered on art. He wasn't trying to overpower it. He was dismantling it. He vaulted off its back, landing silently on the ground. As the monster charged, he stomped hard on the end of a fallen metal lighting rig, sending the other end flying up like a seesaw. The rig smashed into the Bio Troll's chin, staggering it. Naruto didn't pause. He snatched up two discarded steel drumsticks from the ruined stage. He flowed around the monster's clumsy attacks, and with two precise, lightning-fast strikes, he jammed the drumsticks deep into the complex cybernetic joints of the monster's cannon arm. There was a shower of green sparks and a loud fizzing sound as the weapon short-circuited and went dead. From behind a wrecked taco truck, Cassidy Cornell filmed the entire thing, her face a mask of pure, ecstatic disbelief. "Devin, are you getting this? Are you seeing this?" she hissed. "The weird new kid, he's fighting it. And he's winning." But Naruto wasn't winning. He was creating an opportunity. He had disabled its primary weapon and identified its weaknesses. But he lacked the raw power to deliver a finishing blow. He leapt back, putting distance between himself and the enraged, now disarmed creature. His voice, amplified by the strange acoustics of the ruined park, cut through the air with absolute clarity. It was not a shout. It was a command. "Red Ranger, its left knee is unarmored. A direct strike will cripple its mobility." Connor blinked, shaking his head clear. He looked at the monster's knee. The kid was right. A patch of softer, scaly flesh was visible beneath the armored plating. "Blue Ranger, the power conduit on its back is sparking. It's overloaded. Puncture it." Ethan scrambled to his feet, his mind suddenly clear. He could see the conduit, a bundle of thick cables now exposed from where Naruto had been on its back. "Yellow Ranger, your weapons, they generate a sonic frequency. Its auditory sensors are external, below the jaw. A high-frequency blast will disorient it completely." Kira looked at her Terra grips, then at the monster's head. She could see them now, two small, vibrating membranes. He had analyzed and defeated this thing tactically in less than a minute. The haze of fear and confusion vanished, replaced by a surge of purpose. They were not alone. They had a field commander. Now, Naruto's voice commanded, "Attack now." They moved as one. Kira leapt forward, her Terra grips crackling with energy. She didn't stab with them. She clashed them together in front of her, unleashing a piercing, high-frequency shriek. The Bio Troll stumbled back, clutching its head, its chittering roar turning into a pained squeal. The opening was all Connor needed. He charged, his Tyranno staff held like a lance, and smashed it directly into the monster's unarmored knee. There was a sickening crunch of bone and sinew, and the creature's leg buckled. As it fell to one knee, its back was exposed. "My turn," Ethan yelled, his earlier clumsiness gone. He lunged forward, thrusting the sharp end of his Tricera shield deep into the sparking conduit. The effect was instantaneous. Green energy erupted from the wound, coursing over the bio-troll's body. It convulsed, screeching, its form flickering and destabilizing. Together, Connor yelled, and the three rangers brought their weapons together, unleashing a combined blast of energy that struck the creature dead center. For a moment, it was silhouetted in a blinding light, and then it exploded, showering the park in a rain of foul-smelling green goo. Silence. The battle was over. The three rangers stood panting in the wreckage, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. With a final shimmer of energy, their armor dematerialized, leaving them standing in their civilian clothes, covered in dirt and monster entrails. They slowly turned. Naruto was standing a few feet away, calmly wiping a splash of green goo from his jacket with a napkin he'd apparently procured from somewhere. He looked up at them, his face unreadable. From behind the taco truck, Cassidy emerged, her eyes wide, Devon trailing behind her with the camera still recording. She had it all. The monster, the new, colorful heroes, their secret identities, and the incredible, impossible truth about the quiet boy who was their leader. Connor stared at Naruto, his mind unable to reconcile the image of the silent kid from homeroom with the master tactician who had just saved their lives. It wasn't just that he was strong, it was the chilling competence, the effortless control. Ethan looked at him as if seeing a new law of physics being written. All his data, all his analysis, had been a joke. The variable he couldn't account for wasn't a glitch in the system. It was the system. Kira's heart was pounding in her chest. She looked at Naruto, at the calm, ancient wisdom in his blue eyes, and realized the mystery wasn't who he was. The mystery was what he was. The power she had just touched, the chaotic, terrifying energy that had almost torn her apart, was something he commanded with the ease of breathing. He wasn't just a student. He wasn't just a fighter. He was something else entirely. And they were now, inextricably, tied to him. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Scars in the key of C minor. The aftermath of victory was not triumphant. It was sterile and silent, punctuated only by the low, omnipresent hum of Tommy Oliver's subterranean fortress. The scent of ozone and burnt monster goo clung to their clothes, a nauseating perfume of their first traumatic taste of battle. They sat around the central console, three teenagers adrift in a sea of incomprehensible technology. Their bodies aching, their minds numb with shock. Connor McKnight was vibrating with a toxic cocktail of adrenaline, fear, and a burning, resentful confusion. He kept replaying the fight in his head. The feeling of the Tyranno staff in his hands, the surge of raw power, the terror of the bio-troll's claw, and overlaying it all, the image of Naruto. The way he moved, the chilling, effortless competence. Connor had felt like a god for a few fleeting moments, and then this quiet, weird kid had shown him that he was nothing more than a child playing with a lightning bolt. He clenched his fists, staring at Naruto, who was leaning against a far wall, his expression as placid and unreadable as ever. The silence was an accusation, and it was infuriating. Ethan James, by contrast, was in a state of intellectual rapture. The fear had been real, paralyzing even, but the data was exquisite. He was firing a barrage of questions at Tommy, who was patching up a gash on Ethan's arm. Was the morphing sequence a biological rewrite or a hard light projection? The energy readings from the monster's explosion, were they consistent with antimatter decay? And Naruto, Drive, Oliver, his tactical analysis was instantaneous. It bypassed all known models of cognitive processing. What is he? A government experiment, an android, a genetically engineered savant? Naruto, the subject of this frantic speculation, remained impassive. He had given his report to Tommy with the clipped, detached efficiency of a soldier debriefing a superior officer. Target designated bio-troll, primary weapon, particle cannon. Disabled via mechanical sabotage. Secondary weapon, serrated claw. Identified 3 structural weaknesses. Coordinated ranger strike on designated weak points proved effective. Mission accomplished. He had offered no emotion, no commentary, just a cold recitation of facts that made the chaotic, terrifying battle sound like a routine training exercise. Only Kira was truly quiet, inside and out. She sat hunched on a stool, her arms wrapped around herself. She felt hollowed out. The power of the pterodactyl had been a wild, screaming thing inside her, a hurricane of energy that had left her feeling scoured raw. She kept glancing at Naruto, trying to reconcile the boy who had listened to her music with the lethal warrior who had danced around a monster's attacks. She had seen his eyes during the fight. They hadn't been angry or scared. They had been empty. The cold, clear eyes of a man doing a job he had done 1,000 times before. That emptiness scared her more than the monster had. Tommy finished bandaging Ethan's arm and sighed, the sound echoing the exhaustion of all 4 of them. "All right, that's enough for one day. Go home. All of you. Get some sleep. Don't talk about this to anyone. Just process." He looked at the 3 of them, his eyes lingering on Kira's pale face, then on Connor's simmering anger. Finally, his gaze settled on Naruto. The boy hadn't moved a muscle, but Tommy could see the tension coiled in his shoulders, the faint, almost invisible tremor in his hand. The battle hadn't been without a cost, even for him. Perhaps, especially for him. It had stirred things that were meant to remain buried. Their eyes met, a brief, silent exchange between 2 veterans of wars no one else could understand. Tommy gave a slight nod. "Go easy." Naruto's expression didn't change. Sleep, when it came, was not a refuge. It was a betrayal. It was an unlocked door, and the things he had kept at bay for weeks, the ghosts he had outrun by crossing the space between dimensions, finally came flooding in. He was not in his sterile, quiet room in Tommy Oliver's house. He was standing on a field of gray ash under a sky the color of a fresh bruise. The air was thin, tasting of iron and static. The silence was not peaceful, it was the profound, ringing silence of utter desolation. This was the graveyard of his world. The dream was not a narrative. It was a collage of sensory wounds. The sound. The first thing to return was the sound. A colossal, world-breaking roar that was not of a single beast, but of a legion of them, the combined agonized shriek of the 10 tails. It was the sound of mountains being torn apart, of hope being extinguished. Beneath it, a cacophony of smaller, sharper noises, the high-pitched crackle of a chidori. A sound he would forever associate with a friend's rage and a gaping hole in his own chest. The wet, sickening tear of flesh as a wood-style spike impaled someone beside him. He could almost hear their name, a faint gasp. But the memory was mercifully blurred. Sakura's voice, raw and desperate, shouting medical jutsu. And under it all, a constant, whispering mantra of names: Neji, Inoichi, Shikaku, Mabui, the litany of the dead. The sight. The blood-red moon dominated the bruised sky, its surface scarred with the tomo of the infinite Tsukuyomi, a god's eye staring down at the end of all things. The ground was not ground. It was a wasteland of shattered rock and the splintered, bone-white husks of the god tree's roots. He saw flashes of movement, of friends fighting with a desperate, ragged courage. He saw the face of Kaguya, beautiful and alien and utterly devoid of empathy, her pale eyes promising nothing but a silent, eternal prison. He saw his own hands, coated in grime and someone else's blood, glowing with the golden light of the sage's power, a terrible, brilliant sun in the heart of the apocalypse. He saw the empty, staring eyes of a shinobi he had shared a meal with just the day before. His face a frozen mask of surprise. The feeling, the phantom sensation of a searing pain in his shoulder, where a truth-seeking orb had grazed him. The crushing, overwhelming weight of Kurama's chakra, a raging ocean within him, demanding release. But the most vivid sensation was the cold. A profound, soul-deep cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the cold of a dying world. The cold of absolute solitude as he and Sasuke fought a god in a dimension of shifting ice. It was the cold of space, the final, desperate gamble, his hand reaching out, pushing, pouring every last ounce of his being. Of Kurama's being, of the power gifted to him by the sage, into a single, final, desperate point of light. The feeling of being torn, of his very soul being unraveled and woven into a seal. The feeling of separation, of a fundamental connection to his world snapping like a frayed rope, and the subsequent fall through an endless, silent, starless void. Naruto's eyes snapped open. The roar of the 10 tails was replaced by the frantic pounding of his own heart. He was tangled in his sheets, his body drenched in a cold sweat that felt chillingly like the ice of Kaguya's dimension. His room in Tommy's house was dark, silent, and completely, utterly safe. And it was suffocating him. The walls felt like they were pressing in, the quiet air too thick to breathe. The fight with the bio-troll. The simple act of using his skills, of falling back into the deadly rhythms of combat, had been a key turning a lock he had thought rusted shut. He threw the sheets off and stood, his movements jerky. He had to get out. He needed air that didn't taste of ash and memory. He moved through the sleeping house like a ghost, his bare feet making no sound on the polished hardwood floors. He slipped out the back door, the cool, humid night air a welcome shock to his system. Reefside slept under a blanket of low-hanging marine fog, the streetlights casting hazy, diffused halos on the empty streets. The only sounds were the distant, rhythmic crash of waves against the shore and the gentle chirping of crickets. It was so peaceful, so mundane, so profoundly, jarringly alien. He walked without a destination, his mind a maelstrom of past and present. The image of a neat suburban lawn would be ripped apart by a memory of a chasm splitting the earth. The gentle hum of a refrigerator from an open window would be drowned out by the phantom shriek of a dying comrade. He was a ghost haunting a world that wasn't his, and his own ghosts had finally caught up. His feet, moving with an instinct his conscious mind lacked, carried him through the silent town. He found himself outside Haley's cyberspace. The lights were off, the interior dark and empty. The memory of Kira's music, the one thing that had felt hopeful, surfaced in his mind. But the source was silent. The sanctuary was closed, so he kept walking. His subconscious, seeking that same faint echo of peace, led him to the only other place he associated with her. The sprawling, shadowy campus of Reefside Union High School. The gates were locked, but a 10-foot chain link fence was an inconvenience, not an obstacle. He scaled it in a single, silent vault, landing as softly as a cat on the dew-damp grass of the quad. The place where Cassidy had interviewed him. The place where he had sat and listened to the noise of a life he couldn't comprehend. He found the music wing, his instincts guiding him. He tried a door, locked, another, locked. He came to a side door, one used for loading equipment, and the handle turned. Someone had forgotten to lock it. He slipped inside, the darkness of the hallway even more profound than the night outside. He followed the faint smell of floor polish and old tea music until he stood before the door to the band room. And from within, he heard it. The soft, hesitant sound of a single, acoustic guitar, playing a melody that was sad, but hopeful. Kira Ford couldn't sleep. The battle played on a loop behind her eyelids. But it wasn't the fear that kept her awake. It was the confusion. It was the weight of the morphine on her bedside table, a silent promise of more battles to come. It was the memory of Naruto's voice, calm and commanding in the heart of chaos. She had tried writing, but the words were clichés. She tried listening to music, but it was just noise. She needed her own noise. Her own sanctuary. She had slipped out of her house, her guitar case slung over her back, and biked to the school. The side door to the music room was always being forgotten by the janitors. It was her late-night secret. A place where the world couldn't touch her. She sat on a stool in the center of the large, cavernous room, the faint moonlight from the high wind. OWS painting silver rectangles on the floor. She wasn't playing a song. She was just letting her fingers find the notes, trying to translate the knot of emotion in her chest into something coherent. It was a simple, looping melody in the key of C minor. The saddest of all keys, as a former teacher had once told her. It was a melody of questions, of fear, of a strange, burgeoning strength she didn't know what to do with. The soft click of the door opening made her freeze, her fingers muting the strings. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A figure stepped into the room, a dark silhouette against the fainter darkness of the hallway. Her first thought was security. Busted. But the figure didn't move like a security guard. They moved with a silence that was absolute. They stepped into a patch of moonlight. And Kira's breath caught in her throat. It was Naruto. But it wasn't the Naruto she knew. The unnerving stillness, the placid calm, was gone. His shoulders were slumped, his head hung low. He was breathing heavily, as if he'd run a marathon. He didn't seem to see her. He just stood in the center of the room, looking like a soldier who had wandered off a battlefield and found himself in a world he no longer recognized. He looked utterly, completely lost. Her fear vanished, replaced by a surge of something else. A deep, aching empathy. The why of him being here didn't matter. All that mattered was the raw, unguarded pain she could see on his face even in the dim light. Her training, her instincts, her sarcastic defenses all screamed at her to say something. "What are you doing here? Are you okay?" But she knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that words were useless right now. Words were for the world that had hurt him. So she did the only thing she could. She took a breath, settled her fingers back on the frets, and she played. She played the melody he had heard before, the one in C minor. It wasn't a performance. It was an offering. The notes filled the vast, silent room, soft and clear. Each chord was a question that didn't demand an answer. Each arpeggio was a gesture of comfort. The music flowed around him, a gentle current in the turbulent ocean of his thoughts. It was a language that spoke not to the mind, but to the soul. It spoke of sadness, yes, but it also spoke of survival. It acknowledged the darkness, but it promised the dawn. Naruto heard the music, and it cut through the screaming ghosts of his past. It wasn't loud enough to silence them, but it gave him something else to hold onto, a lifeline of soft, sad notes. The tension that had been coiling in his gut since the battle began to slowly, painstakingly, unwind. He looked up, his eyes finally focusing on her, a girl with a guitar, bathed in moonlight. A Valkyrie with a sixth string. He didn't walk toward her. He simply sank to the floor, his back sliding down the cool, painted bricks of the wall. He drew his knees to his chest, rested his head back, and closed his eyes. And he just listened. Kira played until her fingers ached. She played until the melody had said everything it could say. She ended on a final, sustained chord that hung in the air like a held breath, and then faded into a perfect, peaceful silence. The silence that followed was not the suffocating silence of Naruto's room, nor the ringing silence of his memories. It was a shared silence. A comfortable quiet, built on a foundation of notes. She rested her guitar on its stand and slid off the stool, walking slowly over to where he sat against the wall. She didn't stand over him, but sank to the floor a few feet away. Mirroring his posture, drawing her own knees to her chest. "I couldn't sleep either," she said, her voice barely a whisper, careful not to break the fragile peace they had built. He was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, scarred. The quiet is too loud sometimes. The simple, honest truth of that statement hit her like a physical blow. She understood. After the fight, "My ears were ringing for hours," she said, choosing her own truth to share. Not from the explosion, from the, "I don't know." The energy. It felt like my whole body was screaming. He opened his eyes and looked at her. In the moonlight, she could see the faint whisker-like marks on his cheeks, the old, silvery scar that cut across the bridge of his nose. She saw the profound, ancient weariness in his blue eyes. A weariness that had been there all along, hidden behind a mask of calm. "It is a loud power," he agreed. "It is hard to quiet once it has been woken up." She wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Who are you? Where did you come from? How can you do the things you do? But she knew none of them were the right question. So she asked the only one that mattered. Does it ever get quiet again? He looked away, his gaze drifting toward the high windows, toward the night sky that was slowly beginning to soften into the gray of pre-dawn. "It does," he said, his voice distant. "But the silence that comes after is different. It has echoes." He paused. "You fought well today. You were afraid, but you did not run. That is the only courage that matters." The unexpected praise warmed her. "You saved us," she said simply. "We were losing. You were new," he corrected gently. "There is a difference. You have the strength. You lack the practice." The word hung in the air. Practice. As if fighting for your life against a cybernetic lizard monster was something you could drill. It told her everything she needed to know. This was not new for him. This was his normal. She found her gaze drifting to his arms. In the moonlight, she could see them clearly for the first time. A latticework of old scars, pale and silver against his tanned skin. Some were thin, straight lines from blades. Others were puckered and round, from punctures or burns. They were the roadmap of a life lived at the edge of a knife. "It must have been a hell of a practice," she whispered, not really meaning for him to hear. But he did. A sad, fleeting smile, the first genuine one she had ever seen from him, touched his lips. It was a long war, he said, his voice soft with memory. I had good teachers. And I lost a lot of friends. There it was, an opening, a glimpse into the abyss of his past, offered not as an explanation, but as a shared confidence. He had seen her vulnerability, her fear, and he was showing her a piece of his own. He was trusting her with the weight of his ghosts. She didn't know what to say. I'm sorry, felt cheap, inadequate. So she just nodded, a silent acknowledgement of his pain. A silent promise to be a safe harbor for it. He looked at her, his blue eyes searching her face, and he must have found what he was looking for. The tension in his shoulders finally, truly eased. The haunted look faded, replaced by a simple, profound exhaustion. They sat there in a comfortable, shared silence as the first, faint rays of the sun began to pierce the gloom, painting the room in soft hues of gray and rose. Kira reached for her guitar again. She didn't play the sad song. She played something else. A new melody, quiet and simple, one with no key and no name. It wasn't sad. It wasn't hopeful. It was just there. A quiet sound for a quiet morning. A soundtrack for two lonely souls who had, in the heart of a long and difficult night, found a moment of peace in each other's company. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Dissonance in White and Gold. The Mercer mansion was less a home and more a monument to opulent solitude. It stood on a private bluff overlooking the churning Pacific. A fortress of glass, steel, and cold, polished marble. Inside, the silence was a commodity, broken only by the whisper of the climate control system and the distant, melancholic cry of gulls. For Trent Mercer, this silence was both a comfort and a cage. He sat at a large drafting table in his attic studio, the entire space his own personal sanctuary. Charcoal sketches were pinned to every wall. A gallery of stark, aggressive imagery, snarling dinosaurs, mythological beasts locked in combat, abstract explosions of shadow and light. His talent was undeniable, but his art was a raw, uncensored feed from a psyche simmering with a quiet resentment. He was the adopted son of the brilliant, enigmatic, and profoundly distant Anton Mercer. He lived in a palace but owned nothing of it, least of all his father's attention. A stick of charcoal was clutched in his hand, his knuckles white. He wasn't sketching. He was staring out the panoramic window at the gray, unforgiving ocean. His thoughts a turbulent sea of their own. For the past few weeks, a strange, persistent feeling had taken root in him. It was a pull, a faint, humming vibration at the edge of his senses, a magnetic north that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep within the house itself. It was a whisper of power, a promise of something more than his quiet, powerless existence. The sound of his father's voice, sharp and agitated, drifted up from the floor below. Anton Mercer rarely raised his voice. Trent rose silently, his artistic curiosity replaced by the honed instinct of a longtime observer. He crept to the top of the spiral staircase, peering down into the grand foyer. His father was pacing, his back to Trent, a phone pressed to his ear. The security protocols are triple redundant, I assure you, Anton was saying. His voice tight with a poorly concealed panic. The asset is contained. No, it is not a fossil. It's something else. From the island. A geological anomaly that exhibits certain, biological properties. The energy it emits is staggering, but stable as long as the containment field holds. A pause. Yes, I understand the risk. But the potential reward, the key to accelerated, directed evolution could be within that shard. I will not have it confiscated by government half-wits who would bury it in a lead box for a century. He hung up with a frustrated sigh, running a hand through his hair. He looked around, his eyes paranoid, and then walked toward the massive dinosaur skeleton that dominated the foyer. Trent watched, his own heart beginning to beat faster, as his Ather touched a specific vertebra on the Allosaurus fossil. With a low hiss of hydraulics, a section of the marble floor slid away, revealing a dark, sterile-looking tunnel. Anton descended, and the floor sealed shut above him. The pull in Trent's chest intensified, now a throbbing, undeniable summons. The shard, the asset, the key, the words echoed in his mind, laced with the promise of power he so desperately craved. The silence of the mansion was no longer a comfort. It was a challenge. With a resolve that felt both foreign and exhilarating, Trent descended the stairs, his destination now clear. He walked to the fossil. his fingers tracing the cool bone until he found the same vertebra. He pressed. The hidden door hissed open, revealing the path to his father's secrets. The laboratory, beneath the Mercer mansion, was a stark contrast to Tommy Oliver's heroic command center. Where Tommy's lab was organized, clean, and purposed for defense, Anton's was a chaotic cathedral of forbidden science. Wires snaked across the floor like metallic vines. Strange anatomical charts of unknown reptilian creatures adorned the walls. The air was thick with the sterile scent of antiseptic and the faint, coppery smell of blood. Cages, some empty, some holding unsettlingly still forms under white sheets, lined one wall. This was a place of ambition untethered by morality. Trent moved through the lab, his earlier trepidation replaced by a sense of grim fascination. The humming sensation grew stronger here, a resonant frequency that seemed to make his teeth ache. It led him past bubbling vats of green liquid and consoles displaying spiraling strands of DNA, toward a heavily reinforced door at the far end of the lab. The door was locked, a biometric scanner glowing red. But the humming seemed to intensify. And with a crackle of static, the scanner short-circuited, the lock disengaging with a heavy clank. The gem wanted him to enter. The room beyond was a spherical chamber, its walls lined with energy dampeners. In the exact center, floating inside a shimmering, hexagonal containment field, was the source of the call. It was a shard of the same raw, amber-like crystal Trent had seen samples of in his father's private study. The material recovered from the reefside anomaly. This piece was the size of a human heart, its edges jagged and sharp. And embedded within its golden depths, like a seed of frozen starlight, was a gemstone. It was not red, blue, or yellow. It was a brilliant, opalescent white, its core burning with a contained, liquid gold fire. It pulsed with a fierce, hungry light, its rhythm a perfect match for the frantic beating of Trent's own heart. He took a step forward, and the containment field flared, a warning tone blaring through the chamber. Warning. Unidentified biometric signature. Lethal force engaged. But the gem reacted to his proximity. It pulsed violently, a wave of pure power radiating outward. The hexagonal energy field flickered, distorted, and then shattered with the sound of breaking glass. The warning klaxon died with a pathetic squeal. The shard, and the gem within it, dropped from its magnetic containment, clattering onto the metal floor. Trent stared at it, his breath held in his chest. This was it, the key, the source of the power he had felt calling to him. A voice, cold and ancient and sharp as diamonds, whispered in the back of his mind. Take it, you have been chosen. You are strong. They are weak. Take your power. Driven by a lifetime of feeling overlooked, of being the quiet, adopted son in the shadow of a brilliant father, he knelt. His hand, the hand of an artist, reached out and closed around the amber shard. The bonding was not a union. It was an invasion. The moment his skin touched the crystal, a bolt of white-hot energy shot up his arm, setting every nerve in his body on fire. He screamed, unable to let go, the shard seeming to fuse itself to his palm. Images, alien and violent, flooded his mind, a reptilian eye the size of a moon. A world of black jungles under a dying sun, the thrill of a hunt, the taste of fear in the air, the glorious, absolute right of the strong to dominate the weak. The power was intoxicating, terrifying. It fed on the dark, resentful corners of his soul, amplifying his feelings of isolation and inadequacy into a burning, righteous anger. The whispers in his mind grew louder, clearer. You are no one's son. You are a king. Your art is not creation. It is a pale imitation of true power. We will show you true power. White and gold energy erupted from the gem, swirling around his body, encasing him in a cocoon of light. The amber shard dissolved, the white gem at its heart embedding itself into the back of his hand, a permanent, glowing brand. A morpher, sleek and vicious, forged from the energy itself, materialized on his wrist, its design reminiscent of a dragon's snarling visage. The light faded. Trent stood, but he was not the same. His posture was different, his quiet introspection replaced by a cold, predatory confidence. He looked at his hands, feeling the immense, untamed power coursing through his veins. He felt complete. He felt strong. Dino Thunder, he whispered. The name coming to him unbidden, a sneer twisting his lips. Power up. In a sun-drenched, secluded clearing in the woods miles away from Reefside, the Dino Thunder Rangers were getting their asses handed to them. Focus, Connor. Tommy Oliver's voice was sharp, cutting through Connor's frustrated grunt as he swung his Tyranno staff at a series of training drones. You're all power, no technique. You're leaving yourself wide open for a counterattack. Yeah, well, the big lizard monster wasn't exactly using technique either. Connor shot back, pivoting to smash another drone. The four of them, Tommy, Connor, Kira, and Ethan, had been training for hours. After the disastrous first battle, Tommy had insisted on a regimen of intense martial arts practice and combat drills. They were getting better. Their movements were less clumsy, their teamwork was slowly starting to coalesce. Kira was learning to use her Terra grips for more than just sonic blasts, her fighting street. YLE becoming a dizzying dance of acrobatic strikes. Ethan, while not a natural athlete, was using his analytical mind to predict the drones' attack patterns, his Tricera shield a near impenetrable defense. Where's Naruto? Kira asked during a water break, wiping sweat from her brow. Shouldn't he be here? He seems to know more about this stuff than anyone. A part of her was also just disappointed he wasn't there. Since their strange, silent meeting in the music room, a fragile, unspoken understanding had formed between them. She found herself looking for him in the school hallways, found his absence at Haley's a noticeable void. Tommy's expression was troubled. He's recuperating, he said, the lie tasting thin. The fight took more out of him than he's letting on. He needs to rest. The truth was, Tommy was worried. For the past week, Naruto had been off. He was quieter than usual, which seemed impossible. He moved with a faint lethargy, and sometimes Tommy would see him brace and against a wall as if struck by a sudden wave of dizziness. He complained of a constant, low-grade exhaustion, a feeling of being drained. All of Tommy's medical scans showed nothing wrong. In fact, his energy readings were fluctuating wildly, as if he were a battery with a slow, intermittent leak. Naruto had waved it off as his body still acclimatizing to this world's environment, but Tommy's instincts screamed that it was something more. All right, break's over, Tommy called out, clapping his hands. Let's run the simulation again. This time, as a team. The three teens powered up, their transformation smoother, more practiced. Dino Thunder, power up. Ha! They stood together, a united front in red, blue, and yellow. They were starting to look like Power Rangers. They were starting to feel like a team. They were completely, utterly unprepared for what was coming. The air in the clearing dropped 20 degrees in a heartbeat. The cheerful sounds of the forest, the birds, the insects, went dead silent. An oppressive aura, cold and heavy with menace, descended upon them. What was that? Ethan asked, his voice tinny over the comms. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the massive redwood trees. It was a ranger, but one unlike anything Tommy had ever seen. The armor was a pristine, brilliant white, accented with gleaming gold. The helmet was angular and fierce, styled after a dragon's head, with a jagged, blade-like crest. A black, tattered cape billowed behind him, and in his hand, he held a magnificent, serrated blade that looked like a dragon's tooth forged into a sword. The White Ranger had arrived. Who is that? Connor demanded, taking a ready stance. Friend or foe? The White Ranger answered by raising his Drago sword. A blast of pure, white energy shot from its tip, striking the ground at the Ranger's feet and erupting in a shower of earth and rock that sent them stumbling backward. I'll take that as foe. Kira yelled. Rangers, be careful, Tommy shouted from the edge of the clearing. His energy signature, it's off the charts. Let's take him. Connor roared, charging forward, Tyranno staff held high. The battle that followed was not a battle. It was a dissection. Connor brought his staff down in a powerful arc that should have crushed the White Ranger. The newcomer simply raised his sword, deflecting the blow with an almost casual flick of his wrist. The force of the impact sent Connor staggering back. The White Ranger flowed forward, a blur of white and gold, and delivered 3 precise, lightning-fast strikes to Connor's chest, arm, and leg. Each one hitting a critical joint in the armor. The Red Ranger collapsed, his suit sparking, his staff clattering to the ground. Connor, Ethan shouted, moving to defend his friend. He thrust his Tricera shield forward. But the White Ranger was impossibly fast. He ducked under the shield, his sword now glowing with a golden energy. He slashed upward, the blade cutting through the air and striking the shield. Instead of deflecting, the energy from the sword seemed to be absorbed, overloading the shield's systems. It sparked violently, and Ethan was thrown backward, his morpher shorting out. His armor dissolving in a shower of blue static. 2 Rangers down in less than 10 seconds. Kira watched in horror, then her fear turned to rage. She let out a battle cry, leaping into the air. Her Terra grips held in a reverse grip. She descended on the White Ranger like a hawk, a flurry of acrobatic kicks and slashes. It was useless. The White Ranger was a wall of calm, deadly precision. He blocked every one of her strikes. His sword a blur. He didn't even seem to be trying. He caught her wrist in a grip of iron, his other hand delivering a single, open-palmed strike to her chest. It wasn't a powerful blow, but the energy behind it was immense. Kira felt the air leave her lungs, her armor cracking under the impact. She was flung through the air, crashing into a tree and falling to the ground. Demorphed and gasping for breath, the White Ranger stood over the 3 fallen heroes, his head tilted slightly, as if examining his handiwork. He had dismantled them with the cold, emotionless efficiency of a surgeon. He hadn't just beaten them, he had humiliated them, proving in every conceivable way that he was their absolute superior. He stood there for a moment longer, his dark visor betraying nothing, a silent, terrifying judgment on their inadequacy. Then, with a final, dismissive gesture, he turned and dissolved into a swirl of white light, vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. Miles away, in his room at Tommy's house, Naruto was meditating. He was trying to find the source of the weakness that had been plaguing him, a strange energetic fatigue that felt like a slow poison. He was reaching inward, trying to map the flow of the primordial energy that was now his lifeblood. The moment Trent Mercer spoke the words, "Power up," Naruto's world collapsed. It was not a sound, not a sight. It was a sensation, a violent, ripping agony that erupted from the very core of his being. He cried out, his voice a choked, strangled gasp, and fell from his cross-legged position to the floor. It was not pain as he knew it. He had been stabbed, burned, broken, and torn apart in his old life. This was worse. This was a violation on a spiritual level. He could feel a part of himself, a fundamental piece of his life force, being siphoned away, pulled from him through an invisible, parasitic conduit. It felt like a phantom limb was being flayed, like a piece of his soul had been stolen, corrupted, and was now being weaponized. He writhed on the floor, his body convulsing. A cold sweat beaded on his forehead, his vision blurring. He could feel the power, his power, being used with a cold, ruthless precision. He felt the energy blasts, the sword strikes, the final, concussive palm strike, as if they were distant echoes within his own body. Every ounce of power the White Ranger expended was another drop of life drained directly from him. He was weakening, the vibrant energy within him dimming like a dying star. For the first time since arriving in this strange, new world, Naruto Uzumaki felt a chilling, unfamiliar sensation. Vulnerability. Then, as suddenly as it began, the draining sensation stopped. The agonizing pull vanished, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep cold and a terrifying weakness. He lay on the floor, gasping for breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. The residual pain was a dull, throbbing ache deep in his soul. He pushed himself up, his body trembling with a weakness he had never known. He looked at his hands, at the faint, residual golden glow of his own energy. He didn't know how, he didn't know who, but he knew, with a CER, tainty that froze the blood in his veins, that a piece of his very essence had been stolen. And that his new, unknown enemy now held the power to extinguish his life from a distance, without ever laying a single hand on him. The greatest threat he faced was no longer a monster from another dimension. It was a twisted, stolen reflection of himself. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Lens and the Hurricane. The editing bay of Reefside High News was a small, windowless room that perpetually smelled of burnt dust and stale coffee. For Cassidy Cornell, it was a sanctuary, a war room, a place where the chaotic mess of reality could be cut, spliced, and forced into a coherent narrative. For the past week, it had become the nerve center of a singular, all-consuming obsession. On the main monitor, a single, grainy frame was frozen in time. It was from the music festival. In the background, the Yellow Ranger was struggling to her feet. In the foreground, a figure in an orange and black jacket was a blur of motion. His hand a streak of flesh and bone that had just jammed a steel drumstick into the smoking, ruined joint of a 10-foot-tall monster. Enhanced Sector G7. Frame by frame, Cassidy murmured, her eyes burning from staring at the screen for hours. Devon, slumped in a chair beside her, looking seconds away from falling into a caffeine-deprived coma, dutifully clicked the mouse. The image zoomed, pixelating. But the truth of it was still undeniable. The footage was the story of a lifetime, and it was utterly, infuriatingly useless. She had hours of it. The monster's appearance. The three mysterious, colorful heroes. The Power Rangers, a name she'd dredged up from obscure internet forums about Angel Grove and a meteor strike years ago. Their clumsy, failing battle. And then, the intervention. Naruto Uzumaki. She had watched the sequence 100 times, and it still broke her brain. He moved like a glitch in the Matrix. The laws of physics seemed to be mere suggestions for him. His tactical dismantling of the creature was something no high school student should have been capable of. It was the cold, brutal efficiency of a special forces operator, not a foreign exchange student. I don't get it, Devon mumbled, rubbing his eyes. We have footage of Power Rangers. Actual, real-life Power Rangers. Isn't that the story? The Rangers are the headline, Devon. Cassidy said, tapping the screen. Her nail making a sharp clicking sound against the image of Naruto, is the story. The Rangers are the hurricane. He's the eye. The calm, quiet center that everything revolves around. If I can figure him out, I can figure out everything. Her ambition was a physical hunger. This was her ticket out of puff pieces on cheerleading uniforms and bake sales. This was the kind of story that didn't just get you an internship at a local news station. It got you a book deal, a movie, a Pulitzer. But every angle was a dead end. She couldn't expose the Rangers' identities, even her ambition had its limits. And the thought of what drive Oliver might do was genuinely terrifying. And she couldn't present the story of Naruto without context. Mysterious new kid is a super soldier who commands Power Rangers. They'd laugh her out of the industry. She slammed her hand on the desk. Conventional methods are a bust. The interview was a joke. He's a fortress. If we want to know his secrets, we can't knock on the front door anymore. We have to go over the wall. Devon's head snapped up, a look of pure dread on his face. Over the wall. Cass, what does that mean? I don't like it when you use metaphors involving illegal entry. It means, she said, her eyes gleaming with a manic, journalistic fire, we're putting him under surveillance. Operation Uncover Uzumaki was, for its first 72 hours, a spectacular failure. Their attempts to tail him at school were an exercise in futility. He was a master of unintentional evasion. Cassidy and Devon would be 20 feet behind him in a crowded hallway, they'd blink. And he would be gone. He hadn't ducked into a classroom or broken into a run. He had simply vanished into the flow of the student body. He possessed a kind of social camouflage that made him infuriatingly difficult to track. It was as if he could will people not to see him. Their next attempt was a stakeout. They borrowed Devon's cousin's windowless Plumby. Ing Van Gus's Gushers, We'll Unclog Your Life, was emblazoned on the side in cheerful, dripping letters and parked it down the street from Dr. Oliver's imposing modern home. For 2 days, they subsisted on lukewarm sodas and stale donuts. Their only reward a series of tantalizingly mundane glimpses into Naruto's life. They watched him rise with the sun, meditating on the deck overlooking the ocean. His posture so unnaturally still that a bird once landed on his shoulder, seemingly mistaking him for a statue. They watched him train in the backyard, his movements a blur of punches, kicks, and impossible leaps that he performed with the grim, repetitive focus of a man for whom combat was as natural as breathing. They learned nothing of his past, but Cassidy found her image of him beginning to shift. The cold, emotionless enigma from her footage was also a young man of profound discipline and, she was beginning to suspect, profound loneliness. He never smiled. He never seemed to relax. He existed in a state of constant, quiet readiness, as if waiting for a battle that only he could see coming. It was fascinating, and for the first time, a sliver of something other than professional curiosity worked its way into her thoughts. It was a faint, unsettling pang of sympathy. It was on the third morning that she saw something new. She was focusing her camera's telephoto lens on the deck, where Naruto was going through a series of slow, deliberate katas. Mid-motion, he faltered. It was almost imperceptible, a slight stumble, a momentary break in his perfect, fluid grace. He braced his hand against the house's glass wall, his head bowed, his shoulders slumping. He looked unwell, weak. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice sharp. "See what?" "He's just stretching," Devon said around a mouthful of powdered donut. "No," Cassidy breathed, zooming in further. "He's sick." The idea was absurd. It was like seeing a hurricane with a head cold. What on earth could possibly affect someone like him? The mystery deepened, the enigma gaining a new, fragile layer. The chink in his armor only made her more determined to find out what lay beneath. Abandoning the stakeout, Cassidy threw herself into research, digging through public records with a fervor that bordered on mania. If Naruto was the center of the weirdness, then the weirdness itself must leave a trail. She cross-refer. NCED every strange report in Reefside for the past month. Power outages, seismic tremors, strange weather patterns. It was on a restricted server for the County Geological Survey that she finally found it. A report filed 3 days ago. A massive, anomalous energy spike localized in the old, abandoned Reefside Industrial Park on the eastern edge of town. The energy signature described, a chaotic, B.I.O. organic frequency, was an almost perfect match for the residual readings her own equipment had picked up at the music festival. The syllogism clicked into place in her mind with the beautiful, satisfying certainty of a solved puzzle. Monsters create weird energy. Naruto fights monsters. Therefore, Naruto will be drawn to weird energy. "Devon, get the camera," she said, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. "I think I know where our story is going to be." "Please don't say a sewer," Devon groaned. "My allergies can't handle another sewer story." "Better," she said, grabbing her jacket. "An abandoned industrial park. We're doing a location scout for a piece on urban decay." "Urban decay," Devon repeated, his expression grim. "That's what's going to happen to my face when your magnet boyfriend shows up and things explode." The Reefside Industrial Park was a skeleton picked clean by economic collapse. A vast, sprawling graveyard of rusting warehouses and chemical plants stood silent against a perpetually overcast sky. The wind was the only living thing here, whistling through shattered windowpanes and rattling corrugated steel doors like the ghosts of laid-off factory workers. It was a place where hope came to die. "I have a bad feeling about this, Cass," Devon said, his voice a nervous whisper as they crept through the shadow of a colossal, rust-eaten silo. "This place looks like the set for a slasher movie. And we're the idiot teenagers who split up to look for clues." "Relax," Cassidy said, though her own heart was beating a little faster than she'd like. The sheer, oppressive desolation of the place was getting to her. "We're just looking. We see anything weird, we leave. Simple." They found it in the central processing plant, a cavernous building that smelled of rust and stagnant water. In the center of the vast, concrete floor, a creature that looked like a knight from a dark fairy tale was overseeing a squad of gray, reptilian foot soldiers, tyrannodrones. The knight was tall and imposing, his black and silver armor intricate and menacing, a horned helmet obscuring his face. Zeltrax. He and the drones were assembling a device. A tripod of gleaming, obsidian-like metal supported a pulsating, crystalline core that was drawing energy from the air with a low, hungry hum. Cassidy's journalistic instincts warred with the primal urge to run for her life. This was it, the motherlode, an actual, real-life supervillain. She ducked behind a pillar, pulling a terrified Devon down with her, and fumbled for her small, handheld camera. "You are not filming this," Devon hissed, his eyes wide with terror. "The hell I'm not," she hissed back. "This is confirmation. This is everything." She raised the camera, her hands shaking, and zoomed in on Zeltrax. As if he could feel her lens on him, the Dark Knight's head snapped up, his glowing red visor seeming to stare directly at their hiding spot. "We have uninvited guests," Zeltrax's voice boomed, a synthesized, metallic growl that echoed through the cavernous space. They ran, but the tyrannodrones were fast. They swarmed from the shadows, their movements jerky and inhuman. Devon, in his panic, tripped over a loose pipe. going down with a yelp. Cassidy turned to help him, but it was too late. A drone's claw clamped down on her arm, the grip like of ice. Another grabbed Devon. They were dragged, kicking and struggling, into the center of the room and thrown at Zeltrax's feet. Curious insects, Zeltrax rumbled, looming over them. What brings a journalist and her assistant to my private workshop? He picked up Cassidy's fallen camera, crushing it in his gauntlet like a soda can. So much for her scoop. We were just exploring. Cassidy stammered, her bravado completely gone, replaced by a cold, numbing fear. We didn't see anything. Lying is a tedious and predictable human trait, Zeltrax said, a blade extending from his wrist with a soft snick. He pointed the tip at Cassidy's throat. Allow me to rephrase the question. Who sent you? Naruto moved through the decaying industrial park like a phantom. The faint, corrupt energy signature he had been sensing for days was strong here. It was similar to the foul, parasitic taste of the White Ranger's power, but cruder, mixed with the stench of oil and decay. He was still not at full strength. A persistent weariness clung to his bones. He moved cautiously, his senses extended, a silent hunter in the urban jungle. He heard the scream from the central plant. He scaled the side of the building with a silent, practiced ease, slipping through a broken window high in the rafters. From his perch in the shadows, he took in the scene below in a single, sweeping glance. 2 civilians captured, Cassidy and her friend. 1 primary threat in black armor. A dozen foot soldiers. 1 active, unknown energy device. His mind processed the tactical situation instantly. A frontal assault was suicide in his weakened state. The civilians were the priority. Rescue, not destruction, was the objective. He moved through the high catwalks, his footsteps making less sound than the dripping water from the leaky ceiling. Zeltrax was focused on his interrogation. His back momentarily turned. That was the first opening. Naruto pulled a small, smooth stone from his pocket. With a flick of his wrist, he threw it across the cavernous room, where it ricocheted off a metal wall with a loud clang. What was that? Zeltrax snapped, whirling around. Search the perimeter. 6 of the Tyrannodrones broke off, moving toward the sound. This divided their forces. Mistake number 1 for the enemy. As the drones passed under the catwalk, Naruto dropped. He landed on the first drone's shoulders, his hands a blur. He didn't punch it. He jammed his thumbs into the exposed wiring at the base of its neck. The drone sparked, convulsed, and collapsed. He was already moving, a shadow flowing to the next. He used a discarded pipe to trip it, and stomped hard on its central power pack, which shattered with a pop. 2 down. He moved with a deadly, economical grace that Cassidy, watching from the floor, could barely comprehend. It was not the flashy, explosive power of a ranger. It was the silent, lethal efficiency of an assassin. He used the environment, the shadows, their own predictable patterns against them. A kick to a knee joint here, a precise jab to an optical sensor there. In less than 30 seconds, the 6 drones were a pile of twitching scrap metal, and Zeltrax had only just realized what was happening. The Dark Knight roared, finally spotting the flash of orange and black. Naruto didn't answer. He dropped the last few feet to the ground, landing in a low crouch between Zeltrax and his captives. So, the anomaly shows itself, Zeltrax sneered. You reek of the same energy as the White Ranger, yet you are weaker. A flawed specimen. The words hit Naruto like a physical blow. The White Ranger. This creature was connected to his parasitic twin. Zeltrax charged, his wrist blade extended. Naruto met the charge, not with brute force, but with a fluid redirection. He slapped Zeltrax's arm aside, using the knight's own momentum to spin him off balance. The fight was a blur of black armor and orange cloth. Naruto was faster, more agile, but Zeltrax was stronger, his armored form shrugging off the few blows Naruto managed to land. Naruto knew he couldn't win a direct fight, not like this. But he didn't need to. He dodged a slash, scooped up a handful of dust and rust from the floor, and flung it directly into Zeltrax's visor. The knight roared in frustration, momentarily blinded. It was the opening. Naruto spun, his hand closing around a small, gray sphere he'd palmed from his pocket. A smoke pellet, Summit. He'd learned to make from fertilizer and charcoal, a basic trick from a world away. He slammed it on the ground. A thick, Acrid cloud of smoke erupted, instantly filling the area. He grabbed Cassidy and a whimpering Devon, pulling them to their feet. This way, now, he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. He dragged them toward a crumbling section of the wall, leading them into a dark, narrow maintenance tunnel as Zeltrax's furious, blinded roars echoed behind them. A loud explosion from the main room signaled the energy siphon, left unattended, had overloaded. They huddled in the darkness of the collapsed tunnel, the air thick with the taste of dust and concrete. The only light was a single, thin beam of moonlight from a crack in the ceiling high above. Devon was having a full-blown panic attack in the corner. Cassidy was just trembling, her body finally processing the terror of the last hour. Naruto stood near the entrance, listening, his posture once again a mask of calm. But she could see the ragged rise and fall of his chest. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Finally, Cassidy found her voice. It was not the crisp, confident voice of a reporter. It was a small, broken whisper. What are you? Naruto turned his head, his face a landscape of shadows and silver light. He didn't answer her question. Instead, he asked one of his own, his voice cold and sharp, devoid of any warmth. What were you doing there? My job, she said defensively, a pathetic echo of her usual bravado. I was following a story. A story, he repeated, the words flat, dismissive. He took a step toward her, and for the first time, Cassidy felt a flicker of fear directed at him. You chase shadows in the dark, and you are angry when they have teeth. That thing out there would have killed you. For what? A headline, a few minutes of fame. Your story almost got you and your friend killed. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing the balloon of her ambition, her pride. Her entire professional identity. He wasn't yelling. He was colder, more damning than that. He was speaking to her with the profound, weary disappointment of a professional watching an amateur make a catastrophic, nearly fatal mistake. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. I just wanted to understand, she whispered. Understanding does not come from a camera lens, he said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. He saw not a foolish reporter, but a terrified girl huddled in the dark. It comes from here. He tapped his own temple. And here. He touched his chest, over his heart. You are not stupid, Cassidy Cornell, but you are reckless. There are things in this world now that are not stories. They are wars, and you are not a soldier. She looked at him, at this impossible boy who spoke of wars like he'd seen a dozen of them, who fought monsters in the dark to protect people who didn't even know he existed. The immense, crushing weight of the burden he carried suddenly settled on her. The story was not about his power, or the rangers, or the monsters. The story was about him. A young man, impossibly strong, impossibly skilled, and impossibly, tragically alone. And in that dark, dusty tunnel, her ambition didn't just crack. It shattered. The desire for a scoop, for a byline, for fame, all of it crumbled into dust, replaced by a fierce, unfamiliar, and overwhelming new instinct. Protection. The story of Naruto Uzumaki wasn't a story to be broken. It was a story to be guarded. Okay, she whispered, wiping a tear from her cheek with a dusty hand. Okay. He seemed to understand the shift in her, the silent surrender. He nodded once, then turned and began clearing a path through the rubble at the far end of the tunnel. The path is clear now. Let's go. He helped her to her feet, his grip on her arm firm and steady. The professional barrier between them, the one she had tried so hard to breach and he had so effortlessly maintained, was gone. In its place was something new. Something fragile and complex and utterly terrifying. She hadn't gotten her scoop. She hadn't gotten her answers. She had gotten something infinitely more important. She had seen the hurricane's eye. She had seen the man. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. Whispers of the Primordial. The world had begun to sing a new song, and Ethel was one of the few beings in the cosmos trained to listen. She did not perceive reality as the fleeting inhabitants of this dimension did, as a series of solid objects and discrete moments. For her, and for the order of the chroniclers, reality was a symphony. Every star, every planet, every living soul hummed with a unique frequency, their combined vibrations creating the great cosmic music. For eons, the song of this small, water-logged planet in an unfashionable spiral arm of the galaxy had been a gentle, predictable melody, a simple tune of life and death, evolution and extinction. Then, weeks ago, a new instrument had joined the orchestra. And it was playing a chord that was tearing the sheet music of reality apart. It was not a note of destruction, like that of a black hole swallowing a star, nor was it the ordered, crystalline chime of a new universe being born. It was a cacophony, a chaotic, violent, and impossibly powerful surge of pure, unrefined potential. It was the sound of the orchestra's conductor having a seizure. The sound of every instrument playing every possible note at once. It was the sound of Genesis itself, trapped within a mortal shell. Ethel stood on a quiet, suburban street in Reefside, California. She had arrived not in a flash of light or through a shimmering portal, but by simply stepping out of the space between one second and the next. To any onlooker, she was an unassuming young woman, perhaps a college student. With pale skin, hair the color of spun moonlight, and eyes that were a deep, star-flecked violet. Her clothing was simple, a plain gray dress that seemed to shift in and out of focus at the edges of one's vision. She tilted her head, her senses extending, tasting the very air, feeling the vibrations in the concrete beneath her feet. The chaotic music was stronger here than anywhere else on the planet. She could feel its echoes. The patch of forest that hummed with the accelerated song of life, the faint, lingering shriek of alien technology, the deep, resonant slumber of the Gaia kin, the planet's first great children, stirring in their earthen tombs. And she could feel the two primary notes of the new chord. One was a fierce, hungry dissonance, a stolen melody played with violent intent, the white gem. The other was the source, a deep, thrumming, and profoundly weary bass note that anchored the entire chaotic symphony. It was a sound of immense power, shackled to immense suffering. She found him on the cliffs overlooking the ocean, a place where the steady, ancient song of the sea almost drowned out the noise of the town. Naruto Uzumaki sat on the edge of the precipice, his legs dangling over the 100-foot drop. He was watching the waves crash against the rocks below, his posture a study in exhaustion. The parasitic drain from the White Ranger, the fight with Zeltrax, and the crushing weight of his own secrets had taken their toll. He looked smaller than he had in Cassidy's footage, a lone figure against the vast, blue canvas of the Pacific. She did not try to hide her approach. His senses, honed by a lifetime of war and now amplified by his new nature, were far too sharp for that. He stiffened as she drew near, his entire body coiling into a state of readiness without a single overt movement. Naruto Uzumaki, she said. The name, spoken aloud, startled him. He turned, his blue eyes wide, sweeping over her with a practiced, analytical gaze that took in every detail. He saw a young woman, but his senses screamed otherwise. She did not register as a threat, but she did not register as human, either. She felt like the air itself, like a constant. He pushed himself to his feet, a wary distance between them. Who are you? He asked, his voice low and cautious. Ethel offered a small, serene smile. She did not answer in his new, clumsy language of English. Instead, she reached out with her mind, and spoke. Less than I am Ethel. I am a chronicler, and I have come to answer the questions that are screaming in your soul. Greater than. The words were not sound. They were pure concept, blossoming directly in the core of his consciousness. It was a language he had never heard, yet understood with a perfect, instinctual clarity. It was the language of his new self. The native tongue of the primordial energy that saturated his being. Naruto staggered back, his hand flying to his head, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. This was a technique beyond any Yamanaka mind walk. This was something else entirely. What are you doing? He managed to say aloud, his own voice sounding thin and foreign. Less than I am speaking to you as you are, not as you were, greater than Ethel replied. Her violet eyes soft with an ancient, patient understanding. Less than the shell you inhabit is that of a shinobi from a lost world. But your essence, your soul's song, is now that of a Genesis locus. I am one of the few who can hear it. Greater than, Genesis locus. The term meant nothing and everything. It was a key, and he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that it would unlock the truth of his new, nightmarish existence. His caution warred with a desperate, gnawing need for answers. For weeks he had been adrift, a man with god-like power and no instruction manual. What do you want? He asked. Switching to the language of concepts himself, the words forming in his mind with a clumsy, newfound fluency. Less than the chroniclers want nothing. We observe. We record the great cosmic music. But he song you are singing is tearing this world's melody apart. It will attract listeners we would rather not have. I am breaking a billion years of protocol by being here. I am not here to interfere. I am here to provide context. You are flying blind in the heart of a hurricane, Naruto Uzumaki. I am offering you a map. Greater than. She extended a hand. She was not offering to shake his. It was an invitation. Less than there is a place nearby where we can speak freely, a place between the notes. Please, allow me to show you. Greater than. He looked at her hand, then at her ancient, violet eyes. Trust was a currency he had long since run out of. But ignorance, he was learning, was a far more dangerous poison. With a deep, shuddering breath, he gave a single, curt nod. He took her hand. The world did not dissolve. It did not spin. It simply ceased to be. He was standing in the heart of a captured galaxy. There were no walls, no ceiling, no floor. They stood on a platform of what looked like solid moonlight, floating in an endless, silent void. Nebulae of emerald and sapphire drifted past them like lazy, cosmic clouds. Distant supernovae bloomed and faded in silent, breathtaking beauty. In the center of this impossible space was a colossal, celestial orrery, but it was not made of brass and wire. It was made of living light. It did not depict planets and suns, but entire swirling, shimmering realities, each one a unique, iridescent bubble connected by threads of silver energy. Where are we? Naruto whispered, his voice sounding small and thin in the face of such impossible grandeur. Nowhere, Ethel answered, her voice now audible, yet still seeming to echo in his mind. And everywhere. This is a chronicler's orrery, a listening post. We are folded into a pocket of space-time, safely outside the main flow of your reality. She gestured to the cosmic machine. This is a sliver of the multiverse, the great cosmic music made visible. Each of those bubbles is a universe, singing its own song. She pointed to one, a bright, stable sphere of gold. That is your home dimension. The elemental nations. Its song is one of sharp, ordered power. Of chakra. Then she pointed to another, a chaotic, roiling orb of blue and green. And this is where you are now. A universe whose song is wilder, deeper. Based not on disciplined spiritual energy, but on the raw, untamed potential of life itself. She turned to face him, her expression serene. But her violet eyes held the weight of the revelation she was about to deliver. You are not from this song, Naruto Uzumaki. You are no longer from any song. You have become an entirely new instrument. She raised her hand, and the star stuff around them coalesced, forming an image of his final battle. He saw himself, glowing with golden power, saw Sasuke wreathed in purple lightning. Saw Kagaya's monstrous, alien form. He saw the final, desperate act, the 6 paths, the planetary devastation, the colossal sealing jutsu that had poured the entirety of his own power, Kurama's power. And the fractured dregs of the god tree's energy into a single, reality-bending point. You did not just create a seal, Ethel explained, her voice a soft, inexorable tide of truth. You created a singularity. You took the most potent energies of your world, the life force of the Biju, the genesis matter of the god tree, the strength of your own indomitable will, and you forced them through the weakest point in the fabric of your dimension. You did not simply travel between universes. The journey, the sheer pressure of that transit, unmade you. The image shifted. It now showed his own soul. A brilliant golden sun, being crushed, broken apart, and then violently reforged in the chaotic energies between dimensions. Your soul, your chakra network, your very DNA as shattered and then rewritten by the raw potential you were channeling. You did not arrive here as a shinobi. You arrived as something new. A living, breathing, self-aware nexus of primordial creation energy. A genesis locus. The words hit him, and for the first time, Naruto understood true, abyssal terror. Being a Jinchuriki, the container for the 9-tailed fox, had defined and isolated him his entire life. He had been a cage for a monster. That, he had understood. This was infinitely worse. He was not the cage anymore. He was the beast. The power was not in him. The power was him. No, he breathed, shaking his head. A cold denial washing over him. No, that's not possible. I'm a ninja. I'm from Konoha. I'm me. The man you were is the vessel, Ethel said, her voice gentle but firm. His memories, his will, his courage, they provide the consciousness, the focus for an energy that should, by all rights, be a mindless, cancerous force of creation. You are the eye of your own hurricane, Naruto. It is the only thing that keeps you from exploding and turning this entire solar system into a garden of monstrous, hyper-evolved life. Her words unlocked a cascade of understanding in his mind. The forest where Tommy had found him, the plants grown to monstrous sizes. His energy had done that upon his chaotic arrival. He remembered the awe and fear in the ranger's eyes. The chaotic, painful power they touched through the gems was a pale imitation of the storm that raged inside him every second of every day. The gems, he whispered, his denial crumbling under the weight of evidence. Ethel waved her hand, and the orrery showed an image of him after his fight with the T-Rex Zord, unconscious on the ground as the three-colored gems materialized from the air around him. Your body cannot contain the sheer, infinite potential of your new state, she explained. It overflows. The dino gems are the result. They are like scales shed from a dragon, or buds falling from a world tree. Crystalline, stable pieces of your excess energy, each one tuned to a different facet of your own spirit. Strength and courage, she said, as an image of the red gem appeared. Intellect and defense, an image of the blue. Freedom and passion, the yellow. The image shifted to the white Drago gem, locked in its amber prison in Anton Mercer's lab. But your arrival was violent. Your energy was scattered. Some pieces were not stable buds. They were raw, jagged splinters. Torn from you, not shed. This one, she said, her voice grave, is the largest of those splinters. It contains your predatory instinct, your will to dominate, your rage. It was drawn to a host with a similar resonance, a soul full of conflict and resentment. And because it is a torn piece of you, not a gift, it maintains a parasitic link. When its power is used, it does not draw from itself. It draws from the source. It draws from you. The puzzle pieces of his life slammed together with brutal, terrifying clarity. The weakness, the feeling of being drained, the connection he felt to this new enemy. It was all true. He wasn't just fighting a new ranger. He was fighting a cancerous, weaponized piece of his own soul. And the dinosaurs, the T-Rex that had bowed to him. They are the Gyakin, Ethel said, anticipating his question. The first children of this planet's life force, born when its primordial energies were at their peak. They are not machines. They are ancient, elemental beings given mechanical form by a previous protector of this world. Your song, a Genesis locus, is the ultimate parent of all life. When they heard you, they recognized their sire. The Tyrannosaurus was not attacking you. It was a child, confused and frightened, meeting its father for the first time. He sank to his knees on the platform of moonlight, the scale of it all threatening to shatter his mind. He was a father to monsters. He was a power source for heroes and villains. He was a walking, talking Big Bang. And his very presence was warping the world around him. He was not a savior. He was a plague. Why? He choked out, the single word a testament to the collapse of his entire identity. Why are you telling me this? Ethel came to him, her form shimmering slightly in the cosmic light. For the first time, her serene, detached expression was gone, replaced by something akin to deep, profound empathy. She had come here to observe a cosmic event. But now, kneeling before her, she saw a young man, barely out of his teens, who had saved his world only to be burdened with the potential to unmake another. Because you are not a plague, she said softly, answering his unspoken thought. You are a guardian, whether you wish to be or not. A Genesis locus is a beacon. Its song of creation is the sweetest melody in the universe to those who would devour, control, or corrupt it. The one you call Mesogog, this Anton Mercer, they are gnats, drawn to a sun. They are the first. They will not be the last. There are older things in the void between worlds, Naruto. Hungrier things. By being here, you have placed this world at the center of a cosmic chessboard, and you are the king. She knelt before him, her violet eyes locking with his. The chroniclers do not interfere. We only watch. I have broken every sacred vow of my people by showing you this. I did it because your song is not just one of chaos. Beneath it all, I can hear the melody of the man you were. A song of unbreakable will. Of loyalty. Of a deep, profound desire to protect your precious people. She looked at him, no longer as a phenomenon, but as a person. Your world is gone, but this one is now your home. Its fate is now tied to yours. The choice of what you do with this terrible truth, that is yours and yours alone. Will you be the hurricane that rips it apart? Or will you be the eye of the storm, the calm center that holds it all together? The orrery of worlds faded. The galaxies and nebulae dissolved. And he was back on the cliffside. The setting sun painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and crimson. Ethel was gone. He was alone, with only the cry of the gulls and the crash of the waves. He looked down at his hands. They were the same hands that had formed a Rasengan, that had held a dying friend, that had saved a village. But they were different now. They were the hands that had shed gems of unimaginable power. They were the hands that held the potential for creation and destruction on a scale he could not comprehend. The weight of it was absolute. It was a burden 1,000 times heavier than the hatred of his village. 1,000,000 times heavier than the demon sealed in his gut. It was the weight of a god, placed on the shoulders of a man who had only ever wanted to be acknowledged. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the world in a final, defiant blaze of glory, something deep within him, something forged in the fires of loss and war, refused to break. The will of fire, a stubborn, indomitable spark that had carried him through everything. His world was gone, his friends were gone, his past was a ghost. But he was still here. And this new, loud, chaotic world was now his to protect. He was no longer Naruto Uzumaki, Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails, child of prophecy. He was the Genesis Locus. He was the eye of the storm. And the hurricane was coming. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. A scalpel for a god. The air in Mesogog's undersea fortress crackled with the bitter ozone of failure. Zeltrax, the Dark General, knelt before his master's throne, the metallic plates of his armor scraped and scorched from his brief, humiliating encounter with the anomaly named Naruto. The mission to install the energy siphon had failed. The human insects had escaped. By all accounts, he should have been facing his master's apocalyptic fury. Instead, Mesogog was silent. He was not looking at Zeltrax. His entire, terrifying focus was on the small, almost insignificant object held delicately in his claws. It had been recovered from the site, dislodged from the orange-clad boy during the scuffle. It was a smooth, dark stone, no larger than a thumbnail, that seemed to absorb the light around it. It felt inert, yet when Mesogog had brought his own internal sensors near it, they had screamed with readings that were, for lack of a better term, impossible. The stone was not merely a physical object. It was a knot in the fabric of space-time, a piece of technology so advanced it bordered on pure magic. Report, Mesogog finally hissed, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He did not look away from the stone. The boy, Naruto Uzumaki, intervened. Zeltrax growled, his own voice seething with a frustrated rage. He moves with an unnatural speed and skill. He disabled my tyrannodrones with contemptuous ease. His power is significant, but inconsistent. He seemed weakened. Mesogog mused, turning the chronicler's locus over in his claws. He had sensed the boy's energy signature before, a blinding sun of raw, primordial power. But Zeltrax was a keen observer of combat. If he sensed weakness, there was a reason. Leave me, Mesogog commanded. And prepare the bio-sequencers. I have a new line of inquiry. Zeltrax bowed and departed, leaving his master alone in the cavernous laboratory. Mesogog stared at the stone, his brilliant, reptilian mind working at a furious pace. This object was the key. It was a piece of the puzzle he hadn't even known was missing. He carried it to his central diagnostic console, a monstrous fusion of organic computers and alien technology. With a surgeon's precision, he placed the stone into a scanner and began to gently probe its structure, not with radiation, but with a focused psionic pulse. He was not expecting a data file or a schematic. He was expecting to understand its composition. Instead, the moment his psionic probe touched the locus, his mind was flooded. It was not a message. It was a tidal wave of raw, conceptual data. The universe, stripped bare of its physical shell, presented to him as a symphony of vibrating energies. He felt the great cosmic music that Ethel perceived, and it was the most beautiful, most complex equation he had ever encountered. And in the center of it all, he heard the new, chaotic, impossibly powerful chord that was Naruto Uzumaki. He did not see the orrery of worlds, but he received the fragmented, terrifying truth of what it represented. Genesis Locus. The term bloomed in his mind, not as a word, but as a self-evident truth. Living wellspring of primordial creation. The source. Mesogog stumbled back from the console, his mind reeling, a harsh, guttural sound that was half laugh, half choke escaping his throat. Everything, in an instant, was recontextualized. His entire life's work, his ambition, his grand philosophy, it was all rendered laughably, pitifully insignificant. He had spent years trying to perfect a process of de-evolution, seeking to restore the Earth to its former glorious reptilian state. He had sought the Dino Gems, believing them to be the ultimate catalyst, the keys to unlocking the planet's latent primordial power. He had thought himself a visionary, a messiah for a dying world. He had been a fool, a child trying to catch the sun's reflection in a puddle. The Dino Gems were not the source of the power. They were the runoff. They were the discarded scales of a living, breathing god. The boy, Naruto Uzumaki, was not a warrior empowered by an artifact. He was the artifact. He was a walking, sentient key to the very source code of life itself. Mesogog began to laugh, a dry, rasping sound that echoed through the lab. His original plan was ashes. Why restore the world to a previous state when one could seize the power to write a new one entirely? Why be the king of the dinosaurs when you could dissect the god who had dreamed them into existence and become the master of evolution itself? His ambition, already vast, underwent a supernova. It was no longer about restoration. It was about apotheosis. He didn't want to control the gems anymore. He wanted to peel back the flesh and bone of their creator, to crack open the secrets of his impossible biology, and to transcribe the divine language written in his DNA. He would not be a king. He would be a god. And Naruto Uzumaki would be his holy text. Elsa stood before Mesogog's throne. Her posture a perfect model of subordinate efficiency, but her mind was a whirlwind of unease. She had been summoned abruptly. For the past hour, a strange, manic energy had been emanating from the throne room. A palpable aura of feverish excitement that had put the entire fortress on edge. When she entered, she saw that the master himself had changed. The cold, calculating patience was gone, replaced by a terrifying, predatory glee. His reptilian eyes burned with a light she had never seen before. Elsa, he hissed, the name rolling off his tongue like a secret. Our purpose has been clarified. Our mission is no longer one of reclamation. It is one of ascension. My lord, she asked, a sliver of confusion piercing her composure. The Dino Gems are irrelevant, Mesogog declared, icing from his throne and pacing with a newfound, energetic grace. They are mere trinkets, echoes of the true prize. Our target is no longer a collection of artifacts. Our target is a single, biological specimen, Naruto Uzumaki. Elsa's blood ran cold. She had seen the footage from the music festival. She had analyzed the boy's capabilities. He was a force of nature, a warrior of unparalleled skill. You wish to destroy him. Destroy him. Mesogog's laugh was a horrifying, scraping sound. My dear Elsa, you still think in such primitive terms. Destruction is the tool of brutes and revolutionaries. We are scientists. One does not destroy the Rosetta Stone. One deciphers it. I want him captured, alive, and, if possible, completely unharmed. The command was so contrary to his usual methods that Elsa was momentarily stunned into silence. Unharmed. His cellular structure must be kept pristine. His energy field must remain intact. I do not want to break my new toy before I've had a chance to see how it works, Mesogog said. His voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, filled with a scientist's manic passion. Imagine it, Elsa, a living being whose very cells are a gateway to the primordial creative matrix. We will not simply study him. We will vivisect him, atom by atom. We will unravel his genetic code, a divine scripture that will allow us to bypass evolution and seize control of creation itself. I will have a scalpel for a god. The words struck Elsa with the force of a physical blow. Vivisection. The cold, clinical horror of it. She was ambitious, she had allied hers. Elf with this creature for the promise of power and a world remade. But she was a scientist, not a butcher. In her heart, she still held to the idea that their work, while ruthless, was for a grander purpose. What he was describing now, this was not purpose. This was desecration. It was the ultimate violation, cloaked in the language of discovery. She thought of the boy from the footage. His power was immense, terrifying. But there was a control to it, a strange sort of honor. He had commanded the Rangers, protected the civilians. He was a hurricane with an eye. Mesogog. He was a cancer, seeking only to consume and replicate. A bold new stratagem, my lord, she said, her voice a perfect, hollow shell of obedience. How do you propose we capture a specimen of such power? Ah, Mesogog said, a cruel smile spreading across his reptilian features. Not with brute force. We will need specialized tools. Come, let me show you the new direction of our research. He led her to a section of the fortress she had never been granted access to before. The sterile, organized labs gave way to a charnel house of failed experiments. The air was thick with the stench of genetic decay and formaldehyde. In bubbling, green-lit tanks, monstrous shapes twitched and writhed, abominations of flesh and steel, the discarded rough drafts of Mesogog's nightmares. They entered a vast, circular chamber. In the center, suspended in a massive tank, was a creature unlike any she had ever seen. It was a bioconstruct, a horrifying fusion of an octopus, a leech, and a network of pulsing, energy-dampening cables. Its flesh was a translucent, sickly white, and it had no eyes, only a dozen writhing tentacles that ended not in suckers, but in thick, hollow needles. Behold, Mesogog whispered in reverence. Project Chimera, not a warrior, but a cage of living flesh. Its skin is woven with a carbon lattice that dampens and absorbs ambient energy. Its neurotoxin is designed not to kill, but to induce a perfect, system-wide paralysis, leaving the subject's cellular structure completely unharmed. And its proboscises will drain the subject's own energy, using it to power the containment field. It will be the perfect straitjacket for our little god. Around the main tank were smaller ones, each containing a failed prototype. One was a twitching mass of tentacles that had clearly dissolved itself from the inside out. Another was a creature that had solidified into a statue of gray, cancerous flesh. Elsa felt a wave of nausea. This was not science. This was a gallery of torment. It is impressive, she managed to say, her throat tight. The failures were instructive, Mesogog said dismissively, turning to lead her to the next chamber. Now, for the scalpel. This laboratory was colder, more sterile. Zeltrax stood at a console, observing a device in the center of the room. It was a long, rifle-like apparatus, but instead of a barrel, it ended in a complex array of focusing lenses and resonating crystals. It was aimed at a steel cage containing a large, terrified-looking crocodile. Report, Zeltrax, Mesogog commanded. The energy matrix is stable, my lord, the general growled. Ready for live fire test. Proceed. Zeltrax nodded and pressed a button. The device did not fire a beam of light or a bolt of energy. It emitted a low, vibrating hum, and the air around the crocodile's cage began to shimmer. The crocodile thrashed for a moment, and then went limp. But it wasn't dead. Its eyes were open, wide with a terror that was utterly silent. Elsa watched, horrified, as a faint, shimmering outline of the crocodile, a ghostly, green-tinged duplicate, was slowly, excruciatingly peeled away from its physical body. The ethereal form struggled, a silent scream of pure life force, BEF. Or it was drawn into the device's emitter and dissipated with a faint hiss. The physical crocodile remained. It was perfectly unharmed. It was still breathing, but its eyes were vacant, its scales had faded to a dull, ashen gray. And a faint trail of smoke rose from its body. It was a living, breathing corpse, its life force, its very soul, flayed from its flesh. This was the final straw. The dam of Elsa's ambition, her loyalty, her self-denial, shattered into a million pieces. The vision of a restored, reptilian world vanished, replaced by the image of Naruto Uzumaki, strapped to a table, high. S vibrant life force being peeled away by this obscene machine. This was not a war for a planet. It was a war for a soul. And she was standing on the wrong side. She was an accomplice to a monster whose depravity knew no bounds. Her master was not a visionary. He was a cosmic pathologist, and his only desire was to perform an autopsy on God. She turned away, unable to watch any longer, her face a carefully constructed mask of scientific approval. A revolutionary application of energy displacement, my lord, she said, her voice like ice. The specimen will stand no chance. Indeed, Mesogog hissed, pleased. Now you see. Now you understand the grandness of our new design. Elsa returned to her private quarters, the heavy steel door sliding shut behind her, sealing her in with her newfound horror. She leaned against it, her body trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked at her reflection in the polished black chrome of her console. The face that stared back was that of a stranger. The face of a monster's accomplice. The choice was clear. It was not even a choice. It was an imperative. She could not be a part of this. She would not stand by and watch this ultimate atrocity be committed. A direct assault on Mesogog was suicide. Zeltrax was fanatically loyal. There was only one option. One desperate, terrifying gamble. She had to betray him. She had to leak the information. She had to give the hurricane a map of the approaching cancer. She sat at her console, her fingers flying across the holographic keys. She bypassed Mesogog's internal security, a feat that only she was capable of, and accessed an external, encrypted network. She compiled the data, schematics for the Chimera project, energy frequencies for the Soul Scalpel, timetables for their deployment. Everything. She created a dead drop file, triple encrypted and hidden inside a public server for Reefside's city planning department, buried in a folder for a zoning variance on a new mini-mall. It was anonymous, untraceable, but how to get the key, the message to them? She thought of the players. The Rangers were children, clumsy and new. Dr. Oliver was a veteran, but this was a threat beyond his experience. Her target had to be the source. The anomaly. Naruto Uzumaki. She had no way to contact him directly, but she could create a whisper, a breadcrumb of data that someone with his unique senses, or the senses of those watching him, might detect. She piggybacked a subharmonic data burst onto the file, a tiny, almost undetectable energy spike that would be invisible to any normal technology, but might just register to the kind of senses that could feel the pulse of a dino gem. She hit send. The data packet vanished into the network. The act was done. There was no going back. She just signed her own death warrant if she was ever discovered. She leaned back in her chair, a strange, terrifying calm settling over her. She had made her choice. She had cast her lot with the anomaly, the walking storm of creation she had once seen as a target. She had chosen to stand with the protector, not the butcher. The fortress around her was no longer a bastion of power. It was a tomb. She had just passed the key to its destruction to the only being in the world who could turn it. Her final thought, as she stared at the blank screen, was a prayer and a curse. Let the hurricane come. Chapter 8 End. The end. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.